A millionaire decides to put his employees to the test. He hands out lunchboxes, waiting to see who will be selfish. But one of them doesn't eat, choosing instead to care for her sick grandmother. And that simple gesture changes everything in both their lives. What do you think is going to happen in this story? Leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Maxwell Bennett had everything a man could desire. At 52, he commanded a vast fortune that placed him among Boston's elite, with investments spanning technology to real estate. His name adorned buildings across the Massachusetts skyline, libraries, research facilities, community centers, all testament to his philanthropic legacy. The Bennett Foundation had become synonymous with social progress in New England, funding everything from after-school programs in Dorchester to cutting-edge medical research at Harvard. But behind the polished veneer of America's favorite benefactor lived a solitary figure, growing increasingly detached from the world he helped build. Maxwell rarely left his penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, except to attend board meetings or make obligatory appearances at galas where his presence guaranteed generous donations. Even then, he moved through crowds like a ghost, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with practiced precision, while his eyes remained distant, calculating. Mr. Bennett, the proposal for the South End Youth Center expansion awaits your approval, said Catherine Wells, his executive assistant of 15 years, placing a folder on his immaculate desk. Maxwell nodded without looking up from his tablet, where security footage from his various facilities played on rotation. And the quarterly impact reports? All compiled. The numbers look excellent. 22% increase in graduation rates at the Roxbury Center alone. His expression remained unchanged. Numbers can be manipulated, Catherine. You know that better than most. Catherine's professional smile faltered slightly. After all these years, she'd grown accustomed to his cynicism, but it still stung. The board is particularly pleased with the vocational training program. Jessica Turner's leadership has transformed. Jessica Turner, Maxwell interrupted, finally looking up. The one who upgraded her wardrobe the day after her promotion? Italian shoes don't come cheap on a non-profit salary. Max, Catherine sighed, dropping the formality they occasionally abandoned in private. She's been with the foundation for 8 years. Her dedication is unquestionable. Maxwell's eyes drifted back to his tablet. Everyone has their price, Catherine. The question is simply how high or low that number might be. Catherine knew better than to argue. Maxwell Bennett hadn't always been this way. When she'd first joined the Bennett Foundation, he'd been passionate, hands-on, regularly visiting project sites and speaking with beneficiaries. Something had shifted roughly 7 years ago, a gradual hardening she couldn't fully explain. "Will you be attending the graduation ceremony at the East Boston Center next week?" she asked, already anticipating his answer. "Send flowers and my regrets," he replied predictably. "Schedule a video message instead." Catherine nodded, making a note in her tablet. "Dr. Ramirez called again about the partnership with Mass General. Tell him I'll double the grant if they name the pediatric wing after my grandmother instead of me." "Of course," Catherine said, making another note. Maxwell's grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, remained the only subject that reliably softened his demeanor. Though she had passed many years ago, her influence on him was evident in his rare moments of genuine emotion. Left alone, Maxwell returned to his surveillance, a habit that had evolved from occasional check-ins to near-obsessive monitoring. His tech team had installed state-of-the-art security systems throughout all Bennett Foundation facilities, ostensibly for safety, but increasingly serving Maxwell's growing paranoia about the sincerity of those benefiting from his generosity. He zoomed in on footage from the Charlestown Vocational Center, where young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds received training in everything from culinary arts to computer programming. Maxwell studied their faces as they moved through their day, searching for what exactly. Even he wasn't entirely sure anymore. Later that evening, as the Boston skyline transformed into a glittering tapestry of lights, Maxwell sat alone in his penthouse dining room. His personal chef, Martin, had prepared a perfect meal that he barely tasted. On the wall-mounted screen, more surveillance footage played, this time from the women's shelter in Cambridge. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Bennett?" Martin asked, hovering near the doorway. "No, thank you," Maxwell replied automatically, eyes fixed on the screen, where a young mother cradled her child, both beneficiaries of his foundation's support. When Martin had gone, Maxwell picked up his phone and dialed Catherine's number, despite the late hour. "I want to try something," he said without preamble when she answered. "I'm listening," Catherine replied, her voice betraying no irritation at the interruption to her evening. "The vocational center in Charlestown, the culinary program. Let's have them prepare take-home meals for all students and staff at the end of the day tomorrow. Call it an appreciation gesture." "That's a lovely idea," Catherine said, genuine surprise warming her tone. "I'm sure they'll be grateful." "Don't announce it beforehand," Maxwell added. "I want it to be a surprise." "Of course. Anything else you'd like included? A note, perhaps?" Maxwell considered this. "No, just the meal. And Catherine?" "Yes? Make sure the security feeds from all common areas and exits are recorded and sent directly to me, for documentation purposes." The slight pause before Catherine's response spoke volumes about her understanding of his true intentions. "I'll arrange everything." After ending the call, Maxwell stared out at the harbor, watching boats move through the darkness, their lights creating temporary pathways across the black water. He'd built his empire on understanding human nature, predicting market trends, anticipating needs, recognizing opportunities. Somewhere along the way, that understanding had curdled into suspicion. The free meal initiative wasn't merely generosity, it was a test. Maxwell wanted to see how people behaved when they thought no one was watching. Would they take more than their share? Complain about quality? Discard perfectly good food? Every reaction would tell him something about their character, reinforcing his increasingly bleak view of humanity's inherent selfishness. The next morning, Maxwell cancelled all meetings and remained in his penthouse, eyes glued to the live security feeds from Charlestown. The culinary students, under Jessica Turner's supervision, prepared hundreds of individually packaged meals, hearty pasta dishes with garlic bread and salad, comfort food executed with professional precision. "Remember," Jessica instructed the students, unaware that her every word was being scrutinized by her benefactor, miles away. "These meals represent not just your skills, but your contribution to our community. Each container holds your dedication." Maxwell scoffed softly at the motivational speech. In his experience, people rarely brought their best unless incentivized by recognition or reward. Anonymous generosity was a concept he'd grown increasingly skeptical of, including his own. By late afternoon, the meals were ready for distribution. Maxwell watched as Jessica announced the surprise to assembled students and staff, capturing their reactions of delight and gratitude. So far, nothing unexpected. The real test would begin once the meals were in hand. Maxwell had instructed Catherine to ensure the security cameras captured the exits and surrounding blocks. He wasn't just interested in the polite thank yous offered in public, but what happened after, when recipients believed themselves unobserved. For hours, he catalogued reactions like a scientist documenting specimens. Some recipients immediately opened their containers in the break room, devouring the food with appreciative comments. Others carefully packed the meals in bags, presumably saving them for later. A few, just as he'd cynically predicted, took one look and discarded portions in trash cans outside the building, apparently dissatisfied with what they'd been given freely. "Predictable," Maxwell murmured, making notes on his tablet. Each observation seemed to confirm his thesis that gratitude was largely performative, a social transaction rather than a genuine emotion. As evening approached and the center began to empty, Maxwell's attention was drawn to a young woman he didn't immediately recognize. She appeared to be in her early 20s, dressed simply in jeans and a worn cardigan that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with a kind of determined efficiency that suggested someone accustomed to making the most of limited time. When offered a meal container, she accepted it with a quiet thank you and a smile that seemed genuine if somewhat reserved. Unlike many others, she neither opened it immediately nor made a show of gratitude. Instead, she carefully placed it in her backpack and continued gathering her belongings. Maxwell found himself unusually focused on this young woman, though he couldn't immediately identify why. Perhaps it was the lack of performance in her response, the absence of either excessive gratitude or evident disappointment. He tracked her progress through the building's cameras as she exited the facility, checking the time on her phone before hurrying toward the bus stop. Something about her deliberate movements and unassuming demeanor made Maxwell reach for his phone. "Catherine," he said when his assistant answered, "there's a young woman leaving the Charlestown Center now. Dark hair, blue cardigan, heading to the bus stop on Medford Street. Find out who she is." "Right away," Catherine replied without question, accustomed to his sudden requests. Maxwell continued watching as the young woman boarded the new 93 bus. Unlike other feeds from his facilities, The city transit cameras were not directly accessible to him, and he felt an unfamiliar frustration as she disappeared from view. 20 minutes later, Catherine called back. Her name is Abigail Collins, she reported. 23 years old, goes by Abby. She's a new participant in the software development program, just started 2 weeks ago. Previously worked retail jobs while taking community college courses. Excellent evaluations so far from her instructors. Is she receiving any other assistance from the foundation? Just the vocational training, Catherine answered. She applied 3 times before being accepted. Very persistent. Maxwell nodded to himself, though Catherine couldn't see him. Have Ryan follow up. I want to know where she took that meal. The request crossed a line and they both knew it. Catherine's hesitation was palpable. Max, that's beyond our normal. Double his usual fee, Maxwell interrupted. Tell him it's a security assessment, nothing more. After another pause, Catherine agreed. I'll contact him now. Maxwell disconnected the call and returned his attention to the surveillance feeds, but his mind remained on Abigail Collins. There was something refreshingly straightforward about her that had caught his attention, a quality increasingly rare in his world of calculated gestures and strategic gratitude. As darkness fell over Boston, Maxwell Bennett sat alone in his tower of wealth and influence, waiting to receive information about a meal worth less than $20, carried away by a young woman he'd never met. Even he recognized the absurdity of it, yet something told him this particular thread was worth pulling. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Maxwell Bennett was genuinely curious about another person. Chapter 2. The Weight of Promises. Abby Collins hurried through the crowded streets of Somerville, clutching her backpack against her side to protect the container nestled inside. The evening air carried the first hints of autumn, a welcome relief after the sweltering Boston summer that had made the tiny apartment she shared with her grandmother feel like an oven. As she navigated the familiar path home, past the corner store with its flickering neon sign, around the pothole that never seemed to get fixed, her mind raced with snippets of code she'd learned that day. The software development program at the Bennett Foundation's Charlestown Center had been her dream for nearly 2 years. After being rejected twice, she'd spent 6 months teaching herself basic programming languages through free online courses accessed via the public library's computers. Her persistence had finally paid off with an acceptance letter that had brought tears to both her eyes and her grandmother's. "You're just like your grandfather," Maggie Collins had said, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she held the letter. He never took no for an answer either. The memory brought a smile to Abby's face as she climbed the creaking stairs to the third-floor apartment. Their building had seen better days. Water stains marked the ceiling corners, and the hallway carpet was worn threadbare in spots, but the rent was manageable on her part-time barista salary, combined with Maggie's modest pension. The Bennett Foundation program offered a stipend for transportation and lunch, which had been a godsend in stretching their tight budget. Abby fished her keys from her pocket, carefully balancing her backpack as she unlocked the door. "Grandma? I'm home," she called, stepping into the small living room that doubled as her bedroom at night. Maggie Collins sat in her faded blue recliner by the window, a book open on her lap and her reading glasses perched on her nose. At 78, she remained remarkably independent despite her arthritis and heart condition. Her silver hair was neatly styled in the same shortcut she'd worn for decades, and her eyes, the same deep brown as Abby's, brightened at the sight of her granddaughter. "There you are. How was your day, sweetheart?" Maggie asked, marking her place in the book. Abby set her backpack down and leaned over to kiss her grandmother's cheek. "It was good. Challenging, but good. Mr. Reeves says I have a natural aptitude for problem-solving." "Of course you do," Maggie said with the absolute certainty that only grandmothers possess. "Did you remember to eat lunch today? You get so focused you forget sometimes." "I did," Abby replied, carefully unpacking her backpack. "And actually I brought something special for dinner. The culinary students prepared meals for everyone today." She removed the container and brought it to the small table they shared for meals, carefully opening it to reveal the still warm pasta dish. "Look at this, Grandma. Restaurant quality." Maggie rose slowly from her chair, making her way to the table with measured steps. "My goodness, that does look wonderful. What's the occasion?" "Just an appreciation gesture," they said. Abby moved to the kitchen area, separated from the living room by a narrow counter, and retrieved their mismatched plates from the cabinet. "Let me dish this up for you while it's still warm." "Aren't you having any?" Maggie asked, noticing Abby was setting just one place at the table. "I already ate at the center," Abby lied smoothly, transferring the entire portion to her grandmother's plate. The culinary students were excited for feedback, so most of us tried it there. It was a small deception, one of many Abby employed to ensure her grandmother never worried about her going without. In truth, she'd grab something from the coffee shop where she worked weekend mornings, usually day-old pastries marked for discard that her manager let employees take home. Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly, her grandmother's intuition detecting the half-truth, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she settled at the table and took a bite of the pasta. "Heavenly," she declared. "These students have real talent." As her grandmother ate, Abby busied herself with tidying the kitchen and sorting through the mail. A past-due notice from the electric company was quickly tucked into her pocket before Maggie could spot it. They'd been playing this financial juggling act since Abby's parents had died in a car accident when she was 16. 7 years of careful budgeting, coupon clipping, and occasional assistance from community programs had kept them afloat, but never comfortably. "Tell me more about what you're learning," Maggie prompted between bites. "In language I can understand, mind you," Abby laughed. "I'm working on a project that helps match volunteers with community needs. Like a dating app, but for good deeds." "Now that I understand," Maggie nodded approvingly. "When I was young, we just called that being neighborly." "The old ways with new technology," Abby agreed, sitting across from her grandmother with a glass of water. "How was your day? Did you make it to your doctor's appointment?" A flicker of discomfort crossed Maggie's face. "Oh, I rescheduled. The weather was so nice I didn't want to waste it sitting in a waiting room." It was Abby's turn for suspicion. "Grandma, that appointment was important. Dr. Martinez wanted to check your heart medication dosage." Maggie waved dismissively. "It can wait another week. Those copays add up and I'm feeling just fine." The familiar knot of worry tightened in Abby's stomach. Their insurance covered most but not all of Maggie's medical expenses, and even the copays strained their budget. She made a mental note to pick up extra shifts at the coffee shop that weekend. "Promise me you'll go next week," Abby insisted gently. "No reschedules." "Cross my heart," Maggie replied with a wink. "Now tell me, any handsome young programmers catching your eye at this fancy program?" Abby rolled her eyes, grateful for the change of subject. "Grandma, I'm there to learn, not date." "One doesn't exclude the other," Maggie pointed out pragmatically. "You're 23, Abigail. Your whole life shouldn't revolve around taking care of an old woman." "You're hardly old," Abby countered, "and my life revolves around building a future for both of us. Once I finish this program, I can get a real job in tech. The starting salaries are incredible." Maggie reached across the table to pat her granddaughter's hand. "You remind me so much of Eleanor sometimes. That same determination." Abby smiled at the familiar comparison. Eleanor Winters had been her grandmother's best friend decades ago, before Abby was born. Though she'd never met the woman, Abby had grown up hearing stories of Eleanor's courage and kindness. "You never finished telling me how she saved your life," Abby prompted, always eager for her grandmother's stories. Maggie's eyes took on the distant look they always did when she revisited the past. "It was 1962, and we were living in that old building on Commonwealth Avenue, before the neighborhood got so fancy. I was just 19, and the apartment next door caught fire in the middle of the night. Eleanor lived down the hall. She smelled the smoke before anyone else and went door to door getting everyone out." "But you were trapped?" Abby asked, though she'd heard variations of the story many times. "I'd taken a sleeping pill that night, first day at a new job, and I was nervous." Maggie shook her head at the memory. "Eleanor found me, still asleep with smoke filling the apartment. She practically carried me down 3 flights of stairs." "She sounds remarkable," Abby said softly. "She was," Maggie agreed. "We stayed close for years after that, even when she married Robert Bennett and moved to Back Bay, such a kind family. Her grandson would be about 50 now, I suppose." Abby's eyes widened. "Bennett? Like the Bennett Foundation?" Maggie nodded. "The very same. Eleanor's son built the company, but from what I heard, it was her grandson who started all the charitable work. Maxwell, I think his name is. We lost touch after Eleanor passed, but I always read about the foundation in the papers. Makes me proud to know you're benefiting from Eleanor's family legacy." Abby sat back, processing this connection she'd never fully made before. "So the program I'm in now, it's all because of your friend's grandson. Life has a funny way of coming full circle," Maggie said, finishing the last bite of her pasta. "Eleanor would be pleased knowing her family is still helping others." Later that evening, after Maggie had gone to bed, Abby sat cross-legged on the pull-out couch that served as her bed, her laptop balanced on her knees. The Wi-Fi signal they borrowed from their neighbor, in exchange for Abby occasionally helping with technical problems, was weak but sufficient for her to research Maxwell Bennett. The images that appeared showed a distinguished-looking man with salt-and-pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate rather than welcome. Despite his photogenic appearance and apparent philanthropy, there was something guarded in his expression that struck Abby as sad. Article after article praised his charitable work, while noting his increasingly reclusive nature. One society columnist had dubbed him Boston's benevolent ghost, present everywhere through his generosity but physically absent from the community he served. Abby wondered what Eleanor would think of her grandson now. From Maggie's stories, Eleanor Bennett had been warm, outgoing, and personally involved in helping others. Maxwell Bennett seemed to prefer helping from a distance, through the buffer of his foundation and staff. She closed her laptop and prepared for bed, her mind still processing the connection between her grandmother's past and her own present opportunity. As she drifted towards sleep, Abby made a silent promise to make the most of the chance she'd been given, not just for herself and Maggie, but in honor of Eleanor's memory too. Across the city, in his penthouse overlooking the harbor, Maxwell Bennett was reviewing the surveillance footage from the Charlestown Center for the third time that evening. His security consultant, Ryan, had followed Abigail Collins home and provided a brief report on her movements, including the fact that she'd given the entire meal to an elderly woman, presumably her grandmother. Maxwell found himself re-watching the moment when Abby accepted the meal container, searching her expression for any hint of calculation or insincerity. There was none. Just a simple thank you and a genuine, if tired, smile. Computer, zoom in on subject's face. He instructed the AI system that managed his digital files. The image enlarged, revealing details he'd missed before. The slight shadows under Abby's eyes suggesting insufficient sleep. The careful way she handled the container, as if it were precious cargo. The momentary glance at her watch that hinted at a schedule tightly managed. For reasons he couldn't fully articulate, Maxwell found himself wondering what Eleanor would make of this young woman. His grandmother had possessed an almost uncanny ability to read character, to separate the genuine from the performative. It was a skill Maxwell had once prided himself on inheriting, before experience and disappointment had twisted it into suspicion. Computer, save file to my personal server and end session, he said abruptly, shutting down the footage. He moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering Boston skyline, the city he'd helped shape through strategic philanthropy, while remaining apart from it. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment in Somerville, a young woman named Abigail Collins was building her future with help from his foundation, while sharing what little she had with her grandmother. Maxwell Bennett, who prided himself on understanding human motivation and calculating the cost of every transaction, found himself unable to identify what he was feeling. It wasn't quite curiosity, nor was it entirely suspicion. Perhaps, though, he would never have admitted it aloud. It was the first stirring of something he'd thought long buried, hope that genuine goodness might still exist in a world he'd come to view as inherently self-serving. "Catherine," he said, activating his phone's assistant feature, "schedule a meeting with Jessica Turner tomorrow regarding the Charlestown Center's participants." As he prepared for bed in his luxurious master suite, Maxwell Bennett made a decision. Abigail Collins had unwittingly passed his test, but he wasn't finished observing her yet, not by a long shot. Chapter 3: Shadows and Light. The offices of the Bennett Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Boston, a building that Maxwell himself had commissioned 5 years earlier. The architecture firm had been instructed to create something transparent yet imposing, a physical manifestation of Maxwell's philanthropic philosophy. From the outside, the glass walls suggested openness and accessibility. From within, the strategic placement of privacy screens and one-way glass sections allowed for observation without exposure. Jessica Turner stood nervously in Maxwell's office, her Italian leather portfolio clutched tightly against her navy blue blazer. In her 6 years as program director for the Foundation's vocational initiatives, she had met with Maxwell Bennett exactly 8 times, each encounter meticulously documented in her personal journal. His sudden request for information about a specific program participant had triggered equal measures of curiosity and concern. "Ms. Turner," Maxwell said without looking up from his desk, "tell me about Abigail Collins." Jessica took a careful breath before answering. "Abby is one of our newest participants in the software development track. She's shown remarkable aptitude, particularly considering her lack of formal education in computer science. Her instructors note she often arrives early and stays late to practice." Maxwell nodded slightly, still reviewing documents on his tablet. And her background? 23 years old, raised by her grandmother after losing her parents in an accident. Community college courses but no degree. Persistent, applied 3 times before being accepted. Lives in Somerville, works part-time at a coffee shop in addition to our program. Financial situation? Jessica hesitated, uncertain of the motivation behind these questions. Limited resources. She qualifies for our maximum stipend amount. Maxwell finally looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers directly. Yesterday's meal distribution. Did she say anything about it? Jessica blinked, thrown by the seemingly trivial question. Not that I'm aware of, sir. Is there a concern? Quite the opposite, Maxwell replied, his tone giving away nothing. I'd like you to arrange another distribution next week. Same protocol, no prior announcement. But this time I want the meals to be packaged in Bennett Foundation containers, clearly branded. Jessica made a note in her portfolio, trying to discern the purpose behind this request. Of course. Any specific menu preferences? There's something substantial. Protein, vegetables. Enough for 2 people. The specificity of enough for 2 confirmed Jessica's suspicion that this wasn't a general program decision, but something targeted. She'd worked for Maxwell long enough to know he rarely did anything without multiple layers of purpose. Will do, she confirmed. Waiting for further instructions. I'd also like more information on her project, the volunteer matching application. Have her instructor provide a detailed progress report. Jessica nodded. Shall speak with Mr. Reeves today. Maxwell seemed to consider something before adding, and increase her stipend by 15%. Cite exceptional performance is the reason. That's unusual mid-program, Jessica observed carefully. Is there a policy against it? Maxwell asked, his tone suddenly sharp. No, sir. We just typically reassess stipends at quarterly intervals to maintain consistency across participants. Then make an exception. Maxwell returned his attention to his tablet, a clear dismissal. That will be all, Miss Turner. As Jessica turned to leave, Maxwell added almost as an afterthought, and Jessica. Yes, Mr. Bennett? Those Italian shoes complement your outfit nicely. Ferragamo, aren't they? Jessica felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. They were a gift from my mother, sir, for my birthday. Maxwell's expression remained unreadable. Lucky to have such a generous mother. Good day, Miss Turner. Outside in the hallway, Jessica released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In their organization, Maxwell Bennett's sudden interest in a program participant could be either a blessing or a curse. She hoped for Abby Collins's sake it was the former. Across the city, Abby sat in the Charlestown Center's computer lab, debugging a section of code that had been giving her trouble all morning. The volunteer matching application was coming together, but the algorithm needed refinement to better pair skills with needs. You're overthinking it, said Kyle Reeves, leaning over her, shoulder to examine her screen. In his mid-30s with perpetually rumpled shirts and a genuine passion for teaching, Kyle had quickly become Abby's favorite instructor. Remember what we discussed about elegant solutions? Simplicity over complexity, Abby recited, frowning at the lines of code. But the matching needs to consider multiple variables: availability, location, skill level. True, Kyle agreed, but you're trying to solve everything at once. Break it down into smaller functions. Test each one independently. Abby nodded, already restructuring the approach in her mind. She was about to start typing when Jessica Turner appeared at the lab entrance, gesturing for Kyle to join her. While they spoke in hushed tones by the door, Abby returned to her code, too engrossed to notice their occasional glances in her direction. Only when Kyle returned to her workstation did she look up. Everything okay? She asked, noting his puzzled expression. Apparently you've caught someone's attention upstairs, he said with a bemused smile. Jessica needs a detailed report on your project progress by end of day. Abby's stomach tightened with anxiety. Did I do something wrong? Just the opposite. They're considering featuring your app at the Foundation's annual showcase next month. And, he added with a congratulatory nod, your stipend's being increased effective immediately. What? Why? Abby blurted, then immediately regretted her lack of gratitude. I mean, thank you, that's amazing, but I'm still so new to the program. Kyle shrugged. Talent gets recognized. Don't overthink this one. Just take the win. As Kyle moved on to help another student, Abby sat back in her chair, processing this unexpected development. The increased stipend would make a significant difference, perhaps enough to cover Maggie's medical co-pays without requiring extra weekend shifts. But the sudden attention made her uneasy. She preferred working diligently in the background, letting her results speak for themselves. During her lunch break, Abby called her grandmother with the good news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Maggie exclaimed, her voice warm with pride. "I told you they'd see how special you are." "It's strange timing," Abby admitted, picking at her sandwich in the center's courtyard. "I've only been here a few weeks." "Maybe not so strange," Maggie mused. "Remember what I told you about Eleanor Bennett's grandson running the foundation? Perhaps your name caught his eye because of me. Eleanor and I were close for many years." Abby considered this possibility. Maybe, though I doubt Maxwell Bennett personally reviews the files of every participant in every program. "You never know how the universe works, dear. Speaking of which, I have some news too. I went to that doctor's appointment this morning. No rescheduling. Grandma, you should have told me. I would have gone with you. And made you miss your classes. No need. Dr. Martinez says everything looks stable, but he wants to adjust one of my medications. Nothing to worry about." Abby heard the slight hesitation in her grandmother's voice. "What aren't you telling me?" A sigh came through the phone. "There's just a bit more expensive than the previous prescription. But don't you worry. With your good news about the stipend, it should work out just fine." The familiar weight of financial concern settled back onto Abby's shoulders, temporarily displacing her uneasiness about the stipend increase. "We'll make it work," she assured her grandmother, already mentally calculating budget adjustments. "I'll pick up the new prescription on my way home." After ending the call, Abby returned to the computer lab with renewed determination. Whatever the reason for the Foundation's sudden interest in her work, she would ensure their investment was justified. In his penthouse office, Maxwell Bennett reviewed the security footage from the previous day's meal distribution, focusing on various recipients' reactions. Most followed predictable patterns: polite acceptance, immediate consumption, or storage for later. Some subtly checked the quality before deciding whether to keep or discard the offering. Human nature on display, confirming his cynical expectations. Only Abigail Collins' actions had disrupted his hypothesis. The revelation that she had given the entire meal to her grandmother while pretending to have already eaten herself suggested a level of selflessness Maxwell had grown skeptical existed anymore. "Computer, access Collins' file," he instructed, bringing up the detailed background report his team had compiled overnight. The screen filled with information. Abigail Ann Collins, born April 17, 2002, in Medford, Massachusetts. Parents deceased. Vehicle accident 2018. Legal guardian Margaret Maggie Collins, maternal grandmother. Education: Somerville High School, graduated with honors. Bunker Hill Community College, incomplete, financial withdrawal. Employment history: retail positions, food service, currently part-time barista at the Daily Grind. Financial status: below median income, no substantial assets, moderate medical debt related to grandmother's cardiac condition. Maxwell studied the accompanying photographs: Abby in her graduation cap and gown, arm around her grandmother. Abby behind the counter at the coffee shop, focused on crafting a drink. Abby sitting on a park bench with an open laptop, likely taking advantage of public Wi-Fi. Each image showed the same quiet determination he'd observed in the security footage. Computer, search database for Margaret Collins, relation to Eleanor Bennett. After a moment, the system responded, "No direct Foundation records found." Expanding search to personal archives. Maxwell waited as the AI combed through digitized versions of his grandmother's journals, letters and photographs, a private collection he'd had preserved after her passing, more for sentimental value than practical use. Finally, the screen displayed a black and white photograph from the early 1960s. Two young women, sitting on the steps of a brownstone, arms linked, laughing at the camera. The facial recognition software had identified one as Eleanor Bennett, age approximately 24. The other bore a striking resemblance to the elderly woman visible in Ryan's surveillance photos of Abby's apartment. Maxwell felt a jolt of recognition. The system confirmed. Secondary subject identified with 89% probability as Margaret Collins, based on age progression algorithms and facial structure. "Display any related entries," Maxwell commanded, his voice slightly less steady than usual. A series of journal entries appeared, spanning several years in the early 1960s. Maxwell selected one dated June 17, 1962. "The fire in Maggie's building last night was terrifying. If I hadn't stayed late to help her with those job application letters, I might not have smelled the smoke in time. The doctors say she'll recover completely from the smoke inhalation. I've never been so grateful for anything in my life. When I close my eyes, I still see her unconscious form as I carried her down those stairs." Robert says I was foolish to go back inside, but how could I not? Maggie is the sister I never had. Some bonds transcend reasonable caution. Maxwell sat back in his chair, a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. His grandmother's journals had been digitized years ago, but he'd never systematically reviewed them, finding the process too painful after her loss. Now the connection between Eleanor Bennet and Maggie Collins, and by extension, to Abby, seemed almost orchestrated by fate. Computer. Continue search for Margaret Collins references. More entries appeared, chronicling a friendship that spanned decades. Maggie attending Eleanor's wedding to Robert Bennet. Eleanor being named godmother to Maggie's daughter Elizabeth, presumably Abby's mother. Holiday gatherings, shared vacations. The final entry mentioning Maggie was dated just 3 months before Eleanor's passing. Lunch with Maggie today. Her arthritis is troubling her more, but her spirit remains undiminished. We reminisced about our Commonwealth Avenue days, how young and fearless we were. She showed me photos of little Abigail, growing so fast at 5 years old. Such a serious child with those observant eyes. Maggie says she's already reading well beyond her age. I promised to start a college fund for her. The world needs more bright young women. Must remember to speak with Maxwell about setting it up. Maxwell stared at the last sentence, a promise his grandmother had never had the chance to fulfill. She had passed away shortly after, and in his grief, Maxwell had apparently never been told about this particular wish. Computer. End session and secure files, he said quietly. Standing at his window, watching the afternoon light play across Boston Harbor, Maxwell Bennet felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of connection to his grandmother that went beyond memory. Eleanor had valued Maggie Collins and her family enough to want to ensure her goddaughter's child's education. Without knowing it, Maxwell's foundation had eventually fulfilled that wish, albeit years later than Eleanor had intended. The coincidence, if it was indeed coincidence, disturbed his carefully constructed worldview. For years he had operated on the assumption that philanthropy was a transaction, resources exchanged for societal improvement, gratitude, or legacy. Personal connection had been deliberately removed from the equation after too many disappointments, too many realizations that what appeared to be genuine appreciation was often merely performance. Yet here was Abigail Collins, unknowingly connected to his family history, demonstrating the kind of selflessness his grandmother had embodied, the kind he had once believed in himself. Maxwell reached for his phone. Catherine, arrange for another meal distribution at Charlestown next week, and I want to see Abigail Collins' project personally. Schedule a site visit unannounced. As he ended the call, Maxwell caught his reflection in the window glass. A successful man by any objective measure, surrounded by wealth and influence, yet increasingly isolated from the very community he sought to serve. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he questioned whether his approach to philanthropy had lost something essential along the way, the human connection his grandmother had valued above all. The realization was uncomfortable, challenging years of carefully constructed detachment. But as the sun began its descent over Boston, casting long shadows across the city he called home, Maxwell Bennet made a decision. It was time to look beyond the surveillance cameras and spreadsheets to see for himself whether Abigail Collins was truly as genuine as she appeared. Chapter 4. Unexpected Encounters. The Charlestown Vocational Center hummed with activity as Maxwell Bennet moved through the hallways, Catherine Wells 2 steps behind him. His unannounced visit had sent the staff into a barely concealed panic, with Jessica Turner hastily assembling key personnel while simultaneously trying to maintain an appearance of business as usual. The software development lab is on the 2nd floor, Catherine reminded him quietly. Ms. Turner is gathering the instructors now. Maxwell nodded, observing everything with his characteristic analytical gaze. He noted the well-maintained facilities, the engaged students, the motivational posters featuring success stories from previous program participants. Everything appeared exactly as it should, which in his experience often meant the opposite. Mr. Bennet. Jessica Turner appeared around a corner, slightly breathless. What an unexpected honor. If we'd known you were coming. Then it wouldn't be an unannounced visit, would it, Miss Turner? Maxwell replied with a thin smile. Please carry on as normal. I'm here to observe, not disrupt. Jessica nodded quickly. Of course. The software development class is in session now. Kyle Reeves is one of our most effective instructors. Lead the way, Maxwell instructed, noticing how Jessica subtly straightened her posture and adjusted her pace to appear confident yet deferential. The computer lab was a large, open space filled with workstations, each occupied by a focused student. Large windows overlooked the Boston skyline, providing natural light that complemented the modern, minimalist design. Maxwell's entrance caused a ripple of awareness through the room, shoulders tensing, postures straightening, voices lowering to whispers as recognition spread. Kyle Reeves approached immediately, hand extended. "Mr. Bennett, what an honor. I'm Kyle Reeves, lead instructor for the software development track." Maxwell shook his hand briefly. "Mr. Reeves, I understand you're doing exceptional work here." "I have exceptional students," Kyle replied with genuine enthusiasm. "Would you like me to walk you through our current projects?" "Actually," Maxwell said, his eyes scanning the room, "I'm particularly interested in the volunteer matching application I've heard about." Kyle's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "Abby's project, of course. She's right over there." Maxwell followed Kyle's gesture to a workstation in the corner by the windows, where Abby Collins sat hunched over her keyboard, apparently oblivious to the distinguished visitor's presence. Unlike her classmates, whose attention had been diverted by Maxwell's entrance, she remained completely absorbed in her work. "Ms. Collins seems rather focused," Maxwell observed. Kyle chuckled. "That's Abby. When she's coding, I'm pretty sure the building could collapse around her, and she wouldn't notice until she hit a debugging roadblock." As they approached her workstation, Maxwell studied Abby more carefully than the surveillance footage had allowed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, with a few escaped strands falling around her face. She wore simple jeans and a worn but clean sweater, practical clothing that suggested function over appearance. Her expression as she worked showed intense concentration. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned lines of code on her screen. "Abby," Kyle called gently, "there's someone here who'd like to see your project." When she didn't immediately respond, Kyle tapped her shoulder lightly. Abby startled, looking up with momentary confusion before her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, Mr. Bennett! I'm sorry, I didn't—" She scrambled to stand, nearly knocking over her chair in the process. "Please remain seated," Maxwell said, gesturing for her to stay put. "I understand you're developing something quite innovative." Abby blinked rapidly, clearly processing the unexpected encounter. "It's still very much in development, sir. The basic functionality works, but there are several features I haven't implemented yet." "Show me what you have," Maxwell requested, pulling up a chair beside her workstation, an action that caused several staff members to exchange surprised glances. Maxwell Bennett rarely sat alongside program participants. He typically observed from a distance. Recovering her composure, Abby turned back to her screen. "The premise is pretty simple. Communities have needs, and individuals have skills and time they're willing to donate. The challenge is matching them efficiently, while considering factors like location, scheduling, and expertise levels." As she navigated through her application, explaining the code architecture and decision-making process, Maxwell found himself genuinely impressed. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, yet robust in its capabilities, much like the young woman who had created it. "What inspired this particular project?" Maxwell asked when she paused for breath. Abby hesitated, then answered honestly. "My grandmother. She used to volunteer at a senior center before her health made it difficult. I saw how much it meant to her to contribute, and how much the center struggled when they lost reliable volunteers. I thought there must be a better way to connect people who want to help with places that need it." "And the business model?" Maxwell pressed. "Have you considered monetization strategies?" "I haven't, actually," Abby admitted. "I was focused on solving the problem first. But I suppose non-profit organizations could pay a subscription fee for premium features, while individuals would access it for free." Maxwell nodded approvingly. "You've prioritized social impact over profit. Admirable, though not always sustainable." He paused, studying her reaction. "What would you do if a large tech company offered to buy your application once completed?" The question seemed to catch Abby off guard. I hadn't thought about that. I suppose it would depend on their intentions. If they would keep it accessible to communities who need it most, maybe. But I'd want guarantees, even if the price was significant. Life-changing money? Abby met his gaze directly for the first time. "Some things shouldn't have a price tag, Mr. Bennett." The straightforward response, delivered without pretense or calculation, struck Maxwell unexpectedly. It was exactly what Eleanor might have said, what she had taught him before the world had taught him otherwise. "Well, Miss Collins," he said, standing abruptly, "your project shows promise. I look forward to seeing the completed version." Abby nodded, still appearing slightly bewildered by the entire interaction. "Thank you for your interest, sir." As Maxwell moved away to speak with Kyle and Jessica, Catherine Wells lingered behind momentarily. "He rarely takes such direct interest in individual projects," she told Abby quietly. "You've made quite an impression." Before Abby could respond, Catherine hurried after her boss, leaving Abby to process the surreal encounter. Around her, classmates shot curious glances her way, clearly wondering what had prompted the Foundation's elusive founder to single out her work. By the time Maxwell concluded his visit an hour later, the center was buzzing with speculation. Abby tried to focus on her code, but found her concentration broken. The unexpected scrutiny from Maxwell Bennett had been unsettling, not because he had been unkind, but because she couldn't understand his interest in her specifically. That evening, as Abby walked to the bus stop, she spotted a sleek black town car idling nearby. The back window lowered slightly, revealing Catherine Wells. "Ms. Collins," Catherine called, "may I offer you a ride home? Mr. Bennett had to leave for another appointment, but thought you might appreciate the convenience." Abby hesitated, caught between politeness and caution. "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Catherine assured her, opening the door. "Besides, there's something Mr. Bennett asked me to discuss with you." Curiosity overcoming reluctance, Abby slid into the luxurious vehicle, immediately feeling out of place among the soft leather seats and polished wood accents. "Your address?" Catherine asked, tapping instructions into a tablet. "Ben Walnut Street in Somerville," Abby replied, settling her backpack on her lap. "May I ask what Mr. Bennett wanted to discuss?" Catherine studied her for a moment. "He was impressed by your project and would like to feature it at the Foundation's annual showcase next month. It would mean presenting to potential investors, community partners, and media representatives." Abby's eyes widened. "That's a huge opportunity, but the application isn't finished yet. You have 4 weeks," Catherine noted. "Mr. Bennett believes you're more than capable of completing it by then. He's also authorizing additional resources, technical support, design assistance, whatever you need." "Why me?" Abby asked directly. "There are participants who have been in the program much longer, with more developed projects." Catherine's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Bennett has his reasons. He sees potential in both you and your application." As the car navigated through Boston traffic, Abby gazed out the window, processing this unexpected turn of events. The showcase would be an incredible platform, potentially opening doors she had never imagined possible. Yet something about the situation felt too convenient, too targeted. Maxwell Bennett's personal interest in her project seemed disproportionate to its current state. "Does this have anything to do with my grandmother?" Abby asked suddenly. Catherine's slight hesitation confirmed Abby's suspicion. "What do you mean?" "My grandmother, Maggie Collins, was friends with Eleanor Bennett years ago. I'm wondering if that's why Mr. Bennett is taking an interest in me specifically." "I couldn't say," Catherine replied carefully. "Mr. Bennett evaluates participants based on merit and potential impact." The non-answer was answer enough. Abby fell silent for the remainder of the ride, watching familiar streets pass by as they approached her neighborhood. When the car pulled up outside her apartment building, she noticed Catherine taking in the peeling paint and crumbling steps with a carefully neutral expression. "Thank you for the ride," Abby said, gathering her belongings. "Please tell Mr. Bennett I appreciate the opportunity and will work hard to have the project ready for the showcase." Catherine nodded. "He'll be pleased to hear that. Oh, and one more thing." She handed Abby a small card with an elegant Bennett Foundation logo. "This is my direct line. If you need anything at all for your project, don't hesitate to call." As the town car pulled away, Abby stood on the sidewalk, the business card in one hand and her backpack in the other, feeling as though she had just stepped into a story far more complex than she understood. Inside the apartment, Maggie was dozing in her recliner, an open book resting on her lap. Abby moved quietly, setting her backpack down and gently removing the book from her grandmother's hands. The movement caused Maggie to stir. "There you are," she said, blinking away sleep. "You're later than usual." Abby sat on the arm of the recliner. "You won't believe what happened today." Maxwell Bennett visited the center. Maggie straightened, suddenly fully awake. "Eleanor's grandson. What was he like?" "Intimidating," Abby admitted. "Brilliant, observant, and kind of sad somehow. He spent time looking at my project, and now they want me to present it at some big showcase next month." "That's wonderful news," Maggie exclaimed, reaching for Abby's hand. "Eleanor would be so proud to see her family continuing to help people like this." "Grandma," Abby said carefully, "I think he might know about your connection to his grandmother. It seems too coincidental otherwise. Maggie considered this, a nostalgic smile crossing her face. Eleanor always did believe in fate, in meaningful connections that transcend time. Perhaps this is her way of reaching out across the years. Or perhaps her grandson is just running a background check on program participants. Abby countered pragmatically. Maybe both can be true, Maggie suggested. Either way, this is a wonderful opportunity. You must take full advantage of it. Later that night, after ensuring Maggie had taken her evening medications and settled into bed, Abby returned to her coding project. The pressure of the upcoming showcase loomed large, but beneath it lay a deeper question. Why had Maxwell Bennett really singled her out? In his penthouse, Maxwell sat with a glass of scotch watching the city lights flicker below. Meeting Abigail Collins in person had confirmed what the surveillance footage had suggested. She possessed a genuine quality that had become increasingly rare in his experience. There was no calculation in her interactions, no performative gratitude or strategic positioning. Even when presented with an unexpected opportunity, her first concern had been for the integrity of her project rather than personal advancement. Computer. Access Eleanor Bennett's journal entries, 1970 to 1980, he instructed. The screen filled with his grandmother's distinctive handwriting, digitized but still carrying her personality in every loop and curve. Maxwell scrolled through entries until he found what he was looking for. His grandmother's reflections on philanthropy, written after establishing her first community initiative. Charity without connection becomes mere transaction, a cold exchange that may feed the body but starves the soul. True giving requires presence, requires seeing the humanity in those we help and allowing them to see ours in return. Maxwell asked me today why I spend so much time at the community center instead of simply writing checks. Because checks don't laugh or cry, I told him. Checks don't remember your name or tell you their dreams. I hope he understands someday that the greatest privilege of wealth is not what it allows you to accumulate, but who it allows you to become through meaningful giving. Maxwell closed the journal entry, his grandmother's words echoing uncomfortably in his mind. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten this fundamental lesson, retreating behind walls of wealth and surveillance, giving generously but from an increasing distance. Meeting Abby, seeing her work, hearing her speak about her project's purpose, had stirred something long dormant. The genuine care she showed for her grandmother mirrored what Eleanor had shown to so many, including, apparently, Maggie Collins, decades earlier. Maxwell picked up his phone. Catherine, for the Charlestown meal distribution tomorrow, I want to attend personally. The surprised silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes about how unusual this request was. Sir? Catherine finally managed. You heard me correctly, Maxwell confirmed. No advance notice to the staff. I'll arrive as the meals are being distributed. Of course, Catherine replied, recovering her professional composure. Will you need anything special prepared? Maxwell considered the question. Yes, have the chef include a note in each container. Something expressing appreciation for their contributions to the community. And, Catherine, sir? Make sure Abigail Collins' container has a different note. Tell her... Maxwell paused, considering his words carefully. Tell her that her grandmother's friend Eleanor would be proud of the woman she's become. After ending the call, Maxwell stood at his window for a long time, contemplating the city he'd helped shape through strategic philanthropy, while remaining apart from it. Tomorrow would mark a small but significant departure from the detached approach he'd cultivated for years, a tentative step toward the connected, giving his grandmother had championed. He wasn't naive enough to believe one gesture could undo years of cynicism, but as he prepared for bed that night, Maxwell Bennett felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember, curiosity about a connection that went beyond transaction. And perhaps, though he would never have admitted it aloud, a flicker of hope that his grandmother's vision of meaningful philanthropy might still be possible in the world as he knew it. Chapter 5. Messages and Memories. The morning air carried a crisp autumn bite as Maxwell's car pulled up to the Charlestown Center. He had deliberately arrived earlier than planned, wanting to observe the normal rhythms of the place before his presence disrupted them. Catherine accompanied him, her surprise at this unusual behavior carefully concealed behind her professional demeanor. The culinary students should be finishing meal preparation now, she informed him as they entered through a side door, avoiding the main entrance where they might be immediately recognized. Maxwell nodded, taking in details he had previously observed only through security feeds. The worn spots on the hallway floor where countless feet had traveled, The bulletin board covered with community announcements and student achievements. The faint aroma of coffee and baking bread from the culinary department. Mr. Bennett. Jessica Turner's voice carried down the corridor, her surprise evident despite her attempt to sound composed. "We weren't expecting you this morning." "Clearly," Maxwell replied, noting her hastily buttoned blazer and the coffee cup she was trying to discreetly set aside. "Please don't let my presence interrupt your normal operations. I'm here to observe the meal distribution personally." Jessica quickly fell into step beside them. "Of course. The culinary students have prepared a wonderful menu today, herb-roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables and wild rice. Chef Wilson has been working with them on nutrition-focused meal planning." "Excellent," Maxwell said, following her toward the culinary wing. "And the notes I requested?" "All prepared as specified," Jessica confirmed. "The special note for Ms. Collins as well." Maxwell found himself uncharacteristically tense as they approached the kitchen area. For years, he had maintained careful distance from the actual implementation of his philanthropic initiatives, preferring to review reports and data rather than engage directly. This deliberate shift in approach felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, a return to methods his grandmother had championed long ago. The industrial kitchen bustled with activity as culinary students in white uniforms packaged the freshly prepared meals into branded containers. Chef Wilson, a stern-looking man with impressive tattoos covering both arms, directed the operation with military precision. "Portion control, Santos. We're feeding people, not birds," he barked at a young man who was being too conservative with the chicken. "Henderson, those vegetables need another minute. We don't serve anything that isn't our absolute best." Maxwell observed silently, noting the care with which most students approach their tasks. There was pride evident in their movements, ownership of their contributions despite the humble setting. "Chef Wilson," Jessica called, drawing the man's attention. "We have a special visitor today." The chef turned, his expression shifting from irritation to surprise as he recognized Maxwell. "Mr. Bennett." "An unexpected honor, sir. Had I known you were coming, I would have prepared exactly the same meal, I hope," Maxwell interrupted smoothly. "I'm here to see your program as it actually functions, not a performance staged for my benefit." Chef Wilson recovered quickly, a genuine smile breaking through his gruff exterior. "Then you're seeing us at our authentic best, sir. These students put their hearts into every meal." "So I observe," Maxwell acknowledged, moving closer to inspect the finished products. Each container was neatly packed, the Bennett Foundation logo prominently displayed. Beside each container lay a small card with a printed message. "Your contributions to our community matter. With gratitude, the Bennett Foundation." "Simple but effective," Maxwell commented, picking up one of the cards. "Research shows expressions of specific gratitude increase recipient well-being," Catherine noted. The language was carefully chosen to acknowledge their value beyond just being program participants. Maxwell nodded, remembering similar sentiments in his grandmother's journals, her insistence that true philanthropy acknowledged the dignity and contribution of all parties, not just the material flow from giver to receiver. "And Miss Collins's note?" he asked quietly. Catherine produced a sealed envelope. "As you requested. It will be placed with her meal container." Maxwell took the envelope, momentarily considering its contents. Would the message seem too personal, too knowing? Would it spark curiosity or discomfort? The uncertainty of human reaction, something he had increasingly avoided through his remote approach to philanthropy, suddenly felt both challenging and vitally important. "Thank you," he said, returning the envelope to Catherine. "Ensure it's delivered with her meal, please." As the meal distribution time approached, Maxwell positioned himself in a corner of the dining area, partially obscured by a decorative plant arrangement, but with a clear view of the proceedings. The strategic placement allowed him to observe without immediately drawing attention or disrupting the natural flow of interactions. Students and staff began to file in as lunch hour commenced, many doing double takes when they noticed his presence. Whispers spread quickly, and Maxwell noted the subtle changes in behavior. Straighter postures, more careful movements, polite smiles directed his way. The performance aspect of human interaction that had fueled his cynicism was on full display. The culinary students proudly served their creations, explaining the nutritional benefits and preparation methods to interested recipients. Maxwell scanned the room, looking for Abby among the growing crowd. She arrived slightly late, her hair windblown as though she had rushed from class. Maxwell watched as she accepted her meal container, with a genuine thank you to the serving student, her expression warming as she noticed the special packaging. Chef Wilson approached Maxwell's observation point. The software development class often runs late, he explained, following Maxwell's gaze. Ms. Collins is one of our most dedicated participants. So I've observed, Maxwell replied. What do you make of her, Chef? You interact with most of the participants during meals. Chef Wilson considered the question thoughtfully. Quiet but not shy. Always grateful but never effusive. Practical. She once asked if we could provide containers that could safely be reheated without a microwave. He paused. She reminds me of my grandmother, actually. Depression-era mentality. Nothing wasted, everything repurposed. Maxwell nodded, watching as Catherine approached Abby with the special note. He couldn't hear their exchange from this distance. But he saw Abby's surprise as she accepted the envelope, her questioning glance toward Catherine, who merely gestured toward him with a subtle nod. Abby's eyes found his across the room, a flicker of recognition, followed by evident confusion. She hesitated only briefly before opening the envelope, her expression changing as she read the message he had composed. Your grandmother's friend Eleanor would be proud of the woman you've become. Your integrity honors her memory. Maxwell Bennett. Maxwell watched a series of emotions cross Abby's face, surprise, confusion, and then a kind of quiet understanding. She carefully folded the note and placed it in her pocket before gathering her meal container. What happened next caught Maxwell off guard. Instead of finding a seat among her classmates, or departing with her meal as she had done previously, Abby made her way directly toward him, navigating through the crowded dining area with determination. Mr. Bennett, she said when she reached his corner, her voice steady despite the obvious nervousness in her posture. Thank you for your note. It was, unexpected. Maxwell found himself momentarily at a loss, a rare occurrence for someone who prided himself on calculated responses. Ms. Collins, I hope I didn't overstep. You knew? Abby asked simply. About my grandmother and yours? Not until recently, Maxwell admitted. I discovered the connection while reviewing some of my grandmother's personal archives. Abby seemed to consider this, her brown eyes studying him with surprising directness. My grandmother has told me stories about Eleanor Bennett my entire life. She says your grandmother saved her during a fire in their apartment building. Yes, in 1962, Maxwell confirmed. I found my grandmother's journal entry about the incident. A slight smile touched Abby's lips. It's strange to think about, how different my life would be if your grandmother hadn't been there that night. I wouldn't exist at all. The observation struck Maxwell with unexpected force, the tangible ripple effects of one person's actions across generations. His grandmother's split-second decision to risk her own safety had not only saved Maggie Collins, but had indirectly created the young woman standing before him now. Would you join me? Maxwell asked, gesturing to a nearby empty table. I'd like to hear more about your grandmother if you don't mind sharing. Surprise flickered across Abby's face, but she nodded, following him to the table. As they sat, Maxwell became acutely aware of the eyes watching them, staff and participants alike curious about this unprecedented interaction between the Foundation's reclusive founder and a program participant. My grandmother would be thrilled to know I'm speaking with you, Abby said, carefully opening her meal container. She follows all the news about the Bennett Foundation. Says it's exactly what Eleanor would have wanted, using resources to help others build better lives. And what do you think? Maxwell asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Abby considered the question with a seriousness he found refreshing. I think intention matters as much as action. Giving with strings attached or for recognition isn't the same as giving because you genuinely care about making a difference. Some would argue the outcome matters more than motivation, Maxwell countered, finding himself engaged in a more authentic conversation than he'd had in years. If a hospital wing is built, does it matter whether the donor wanted healing or a tax deduction? Maybe not to the patients, Abby acknowledged, but I think it matters to the giver. My grandmother always says that how you do things shapes who you become. She paused, then added with a small smile, She also says I overthink everything. A trait we apparently share, Maxwell remarked, surprising himself with the personal admission. Your project reflects that thoughtfulness. The volunteer matching application shows a deep understanding of both technical requirements and human needs. Abby's expression brightened at the mention of her project. It's coming along well. Your offer to feature it at the showcase is incredibly generous, though I'm still not entirely sure why you selected it. Merit, Maxwell stated simply, and perhaps a touch of serendipity, given our grandmother's connection. Before Abby could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of concern crossing her face. I'm sorry, it's my grandmother's doctor. Would you excuse me for a moment? Maxwell nodded, watching as Abby stepped away to take the call in a quieter corner. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she listened, one hand unconsciously rising to cover her heart, in a gesture that reminded Maxwell painfully of his own grandmother. When she returned to the table minutes later, the carefree quality had vanished from her demeanor. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Bennett, but I need to leave early. My grandmother's had some test results come back, and I need to speak with her doctor." "Of course," Maxwell said immediately. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The offer was sincere, another departure from his usual detached approach, but Abby shook her head. "That's very kind, but no, it's probably nothing serious. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today." As she gathered her belongings, carefully packing the barely touched meal to take with her, Maxwell made a quick decision. "Ms. Collins, Abby, please take my card. If you need anything at all regarding your grandmother's situation, don't hesitate to contact me directly." Abby accepted the sleek business card with visible surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett, that's very generous." "Maxwell, please," he corrected. Another small but significant departure from his usual formality with program participants. With a nod and a quick smile, Abby hurried from the dining area, leaving Maxwell to process the unexpected turn their interaction had taken. He remained at the table, aware of curious glances but focused on his own thoughts. Catherine approached after a few minutes. "Is everything all right, sir?" Miss Collins had to leave. Something about her grandmother's medical situation, Maxwell explained, rising from the table. "I want you to contact Ryan. Have him find out exactly what's happening with Margaret Collins's health discreetly." "Of course," Catherine agreed, making a note in her tablet. "And the meal distribution? Would you like to stay for the remainder?" Maxwell shook his head. "No, but I want a full report on reactions and outcomes." He paused, then added, "And Catherine, arrange for meal distributions to continue twice weekly, not just here, at all our vocational centers." Catherine's surprise was visible despite her professional composure. "That's a significant expansion of the program. I'll need to adjust the culinary department budgets accordingly." "Do it," Maxwell confirmed, "and ensure the appreciation notes continue as well. Different messages each time." As they departed the center, Maxwell found himself replaying his conversation with Abby, struck by the genuineness she brought to each interaction. In a world where he had grown accustomed to calculating the angle behind every smile and the price of every favor, her straightforward nature was both refreshing and destabilizing to his carefully constructed worldview. Back in his office later that afternoon, Maxwell reviewed the digital archive of his grandmother's journals, searching for additional references to Maggie Collins. The friendship documented in those pages spanned decades, birthdays, holidays, everyday moments of connection that Eleanor had considered worth recording. One entry from 1975 particularly caught his attention. "Maggie asked me today why Robert and I give so much away, when we could easily live even more comfortably than we do. Because comfort without purpose becomes a prison," I told her. She understood immediately. Maggie always does. We may have grown up in different circumstances, but our hearts speak the same language. She gives from what little she has with the same joy I feel giving from our abundance. Perhaps that's the secret. The joy isn't in the amount, but in the giving itself. Maxwell sat back in his chair, his grandmother's words resonating uncomfortably with his current approach to philanthropy. Somewhere along the way, he had lost the joy she described, the personal connection that had made giving meaningful rather than merely strategic. His phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "Medical information obtained re Margaret Collins. Cardiac condition worsening. New treatment plan recommended, but insurance coverage limited. Estimated out-of-pocket costs £32,000. Details in secure file." Maxwell stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. He could easily cover that amount, a trivial sum compared to his foundation's annual budget. But simply paying the bill felt somehow insufficient, too transactional for the situation at hand. Eleanor would have visited herself, brought food, sat with Maggie through treatments. She would have made it personal because to her, philanthropy had never been about anonymous checks, but about human connection. Maxwell Bennett had spent years building walls between himself and those his foundation helped. Now faced with a direct connection to his grandmother's past and a young woman whose genuine nature had begun to crack those walls, he found himself at a crossroads. After a moment's contemplation, he pressed the intercom button. "Catherine, cancel my meetings for the remainder of the day, and have the car brought around. I need to make a personal visit." Catherine's surprise was evident even through the intercom. "May I ask where you're going, sir?" Maxwell hesitated only briefly, Somerville. There's someone I need to see. Chapter 6. Crossing Thresholds. As Maxwell's sleek black Bentley eased through the narrow streets of Somerville, the contrast between his world and this one grew increasingly stark. Aging triple-deckers with peeling paint stood shoulder to shoulder, their weathered facades telling stories of generations who had called this working-class neighborhood home. Children played on sidewalks cracked by years of harsh New England winters, their laughter rising above the distant sounds of traffic and construction. Catherine had insisted on accompanying him, her concern barely concealed behind professional composure. "Sir, perhaps we should call ahead, or send a representative first to explain." "No," Maxwell said firmly, his eyes on the neighborhood passing outside his window. "This isn't a foundation matter. It's personal. May I ask what you intend to accomplish with this visit?" Catherine ventured carefully. Maxwell considered the question. What did he intend? The decision to come here had been impulsive, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted, "but it feels necessary." When the car pulled up outside the modest apartment building on Walnut Street, Maxwell felt a momentary hesitation. The edifice was considerably more run down than it had appeared in Ryan's surveillance photos. Crumbling concrete steps leading to a security door with a buzzer system that appeared decades old. Several buzzers lacked name labels altogether. Others displayed handwritten cards faded nearly to illegibility. Collins Mitchell, 3B, was written in neat, precise lettering on one of the few clearly marked buzzers. "Would you like me to accompany you, sir?" Catherine asked as Maxwell prepared to exit the vehicle. He shook his head. "Wait here. This won't take long." The autumn air felt crisp as Maxwell approached the building, absently noting the sensation of uneven concrete beneath his Italian leather shoes. How long had it been since he'd walked on anything other than the polished marble of his building lobbies, the plush carpets of executive offices, or the pristine floors of his foundation's facilities? Maxwell pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B, hearing a distant, tinny buzz within the building. After a moment, a crackling voice came through the ancient intercom. "Hello?" The voice was elderly, tentative. Maggie Collins, presumably. Maxwell suddenly realized he had given no thought to what he would actually say. "Mrs. Collins. My name is Maxwell Bennett. I believe you knew my grandmother, Eleanor Bennett." A long pause followed, the intercom silent for so long that Maxwell wondered if the system had malfunctioned. Then, with a sharp buzz, the security door unlocked. "Third floor, apartment B," the voice instructed, a new energy evident despite the poor audio quality. "Mind the second floor landing? The light's been out for a week." Maxwell entered a narrow hallway with worn carpet and walls that had seen too many hasty paint jobs over the decades. The stairwell smelled of cooking odors from various apartments, garlic and spices mingling with the faint mustiness of an old building. As warned, the second floor landing was dim, illuminated only by light spilling from the floors above and below. By the time he reached the third floor, Maxwell was slightly winded, an unexpected reminder of how long it had been since he'd used stairs rather than elevators or private gyms with personal trainers. Outside apartment 3B, he paused to straighten his tie and collect himself before knocking. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a silver-haired woman whose alert brown eyes studied him with unconcealed curiosity. Despite her age, she must be in her late 70s, Maxwell calculated. Maggie Collins stood straight, her gaze direct and appraising. "My word," she said softly. "You look just like her, around the eyes especially." The observation caught Maxwell off guard. He had been told he resembled his father more than the Bennett side of the family. "Thank you for seeing me without notice, Mrs. Collins," he said formally. "I apologize for the intrusion." "Maggie, please," she corrected, stepping aside to welcome him in. "And any family of Eleanor's is welcome in my home, unannounced or otherwise." The apartment was small but meticulously maintained, its modest furnishings arranged to maximize the limited space. A pull-out couch with neatly folded linens suggested where Abby slept. Family photos adorned the walls and surfaces, several featuring a younger Maggie, with a woman Maxwell recognized from his grandmother's albums. Eleanor and Maggie, arms linked, smiling at the camera across decades. "Please sit down," Maggie offered, gesturing to a worn but clean armchair. "Can I get you anything?" "Tea, perhaps." Eleanor always took hers with honey and lemon. "Nothing, thank you," Maxwell replied, feeling increasingly uncertain about his purpose here as he carefully lowered himself into the offered seat. Maggie settled into her own chair, a recliner with armrests polished smooth by years of use. "I imagine you're wondering about Abby. She's at the—" Hospital with Dr. Martinez discussing my treatment options. She should be home soon. Actually, Maxwell admitted, I came to see you. Maggie's eyebrows rose slightly. Me? Well, that is unexpected. May I ask why? Maxwell found himself momentarily at a loss for words, an unusual state for someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and directing philanthropic initiatives worth millions. I recently discovered the connection between our families, he finally said. My grandmother's journals mentioned you often. A warm smile spread across Maggie's face. Eleanor kept journals? That sounds like her. She always said that memories were too precious to trust to mind alone. She leaned forward slightly. Would it be too much to ask what she wrote about me? She called you the sister she never had, Maxwell said quietly. She wrote about the fire in 1962, about holidays you spent together, about being godmother to your daughter. Maggie nodded, her eyes growing misty. Elizabeth? Abby's mother. She reached for a framed photograph on the side table, passing it to Maxwell. This was taken at Elizabeth's 5th birthday. Eleanor brought that ridiculous cake. 3 tiers for a child's party. That was Eleanor, though. Never did anything halfway when it came to people she loved. Maxwell studied the photograph, his grandmother kneeling beside a dark-haired little girl whose smile revealed missing front teeth, both of them beaming with frosting-smudged faces. He couldn't recall ever seeing that particular expression on his grandmother's face in his presence, uninhibited joy, free from the dignified restraint she typically maintained in family settings. I don't have many clear memories of my grandmother, Maxwell confessed, surprising himself with the admission. She passed when I was quite young. 8, Maggie supplied, then smiled at his surprised expression. Eleanor told me everything. She adored you, you know. Said you had an old soul even as a child. Always asking questions about why people behaved the way they did. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Maxwell's lifelong analysis of human behavior and motivation had indeed started early, though somewhere along the way, it had curdled from curiosity into cynicism. I'm curious, Maggie continued, studying him with those perceptive eyes that reminded him so much of Abby's. What finally brought you to my door after all these years? Eleanor has been gone for quite some time. Maxwell considered evading the question, offering some polite explanation about reconnecting with his grandmother's past. Instead, he found himself answering with unexpected honesty. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. I've been observing your granddaughter at our vocational center. Her integrity made an impression. When I discovered the connection to my grandmother, it seemed significant somehow. Ah, Maggie said, a knowing expression crossing her face. Abby has that effect on people. She sees the world clearly but without cynicism, a rare quality these days. She paused, then added gently, rather like Eleanor used to say about you, before life taught you otherwise. The observation landed like a physical blow, its accuracy painful. My grandmother said that. About me? Maggie nodded. She worried, you know, after your parents' divorce. Said you were building walls to protect yourself, and she feared what might happen if no one helped you take them down again. She smiled sadly. We lose touch with people and years pass. I often wondered what became of that thoughtful little boy she described. Maxwell sat very still, absorbing this perspective on himself from decades past, his grandmother's concerns articulated through the woman who had known her best. It was disorienting to be seen so clearly by a stranger, to have parts of himself he had long buried recognized and named. I built a foundation, he said finally, helping people build better lives through education, through opportunity. Yes, Maggie acknowledged. Eleanor would be proud of that work, but I suspect she would care more about whether you found happiness in the process. Before Maxwell could respond to this uncomfortably perceptive observation, the apartment door opened and Abby entered, her expression distracted until she registered the unexpected visitor sitting in her living room. Mr. Bennett, she exclaimed, freezing in the doorway. What are you doing here? Maxwell came to see me, dear, Maggie explained calmly. We've been having a lovely chat about Eleanor. Abby's eyes darted between them, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. I see, she said, though her expression suggested the opposite. She set down her backpack and a folder of medical documents, composing herself with visible effort. I hope Grandma's been a good hostess. Impeccable, Maxwell assured her, rising from his chair. Though I should apologize for the unannounced visit. No need for apologies, Maggie insisted. Though I do wish I'd known you were coming. I would have baked something. Eleanor always said my lemon squares were worth breaking any diet for. Abby moved to her grandmother's side, a protective gesture that Maxwell couldn't help but note. How did your appointment go? Maggie asked, patting her granddaughter's hand. A shadow crossed Abby's face. "We can discuss it later, Grandma." "Nonsense," Maggie said firmly. "If it's about my heart, I want to hear it. And Maxwell doesn't mind, do you, dear?" Put on the spot, Maxwell could only shake his head. "Not at all, though I'm happy to give you privacy if you prefer." "Stay," Maggie insisted. "Eleanor would want family present for important discussions." The casual inclusion of him as family caught Maxwell off guard, but before he could respond, Abby had begun explaining the doctor's recommendations. "Dr. Martinez thinks the new medication isn't working as well as hoped. He wants to try a different approach, a specialized procedure that could regulate your heartbeat more effectively." Abby's professional tone couldn't quite mask her underlying concern. "The problem is, insurance will only cover about 60% of the cost." "And the remainder?" Maggie asked pragmatically. Abby hesitated. "It's substantial. But don't worry, I've been researching assistance programs and I can pick up extra shifts at the coffee shop. Maybe even take a semester break from the program if needed." "Absolutely not," Maggie stated firmly. "You're not interrupting your education. We'll figure something else out." Maxwell, who had been listening silently, found himself speaking without premeditation. "I can help." Both women turned to look at him, identical expressions of surprise on their faces. "That's very kind." Abby began carefully. "But we couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," Maxwell interrupted, surprising himself with the fervor in his voice. "My grandmother clearly intended to help your family long ago. Consider it fulfilling her wishes." Maggie studied him with those perceptive eyes. "Eleanor was generous, but she never believed in solving problems by simply throwing money at them. She believed in connection, in being present." The gentle rebuke was delivered with such kindness that it took Maxwell a moment to recognize it for what it was. When he did, he felt an unexpected smile tug at his lips, the first genuine one in longer than he could remember. "You're right," he acknowledged. "Eleanor would be disappointed in my approach." He considered for a moment, then continued. "What if instead I arranged for you to be treated at Massachusetts General, where the Bennett Foundation has a partnership program? The procedure would be covered as part of our ongoing research initiative in cardiac care." Abby's eyes narrowed slightly. "Does such a program actually exist, or would you be creating it specifically for this situation?" Maxwell appreciated her directness. "The partnership exists. The specific focus might be expedited in this case." "And what would be expected in return?" Abby asked, her protective instincts clearly engaged. "Publicity? Testimonials?" "Abby?" Maggie chided gently. "No, it's a fair question," Maxwell said. "The Foundation typically documents outcomes for research purposes, but participation in any public relations efforts would be entirely voluntary." He paused, then added with unexpected candor, "Though I would ask one thing in return." "What's that?" Maggie asked when he didn't immediately continue. "Your lemon square recipe," Maxwell said, surprising himself as much as the two women. "My grandmother apparently thought quite highly of it." The unexpected request broke the tension, drawing a warm laugh from Maggie. "Well, that seems a fair trade. Though I should warn you, Eleanor tried for years to recreate them herself, and never quite managed it." "Grandma?" Abby interjected, still wary. "This is very generous, but it's a lot to process. Perhaps we could take some time to consider." Maxwell nodded, respecting her caution. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." He reached for his wallet and extracted a business card, handing it to Abby. "My personal number is on the back. Call me when you've made a decision or if you have any questions." As he prepared to leave, Maggie rose from her chair with some effort. "Before you go, there's something I think you should see." She moved to a small secretary desk in the corner, opening a drawer and retrieving an old envelope. "Eleanor gave me this years ago, after your grandfather passed. Said it might be important someday." She handed Maxwell the envelope, its paper yellowed with age, his grandmother's elegant handwriting visible on the front. "For Maggie, to be shared when needed most." "I've never opened it," Maggie admitted. "Somehow it never felt like the right time. But I think today might be." Maxwell accepted the envelope with a strange sense of reverence, feeling the weight of his grandmother's intentions across decades. "Thank you," he said simply, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. At the door, Maggie surprised him with a brief, warm hug. "Don't be a stranger, Maxwell. Eleanor would want us to know each other." The simple sincerity of the statement caught him off guard, stirring emotions he had long kept carefully controlled. "I'd like that," he replied, meaning it more than he had expected to. As he descended the stairs, Maxwell felt oddly lighter than when he had arrived, despite the complex emotions the visit had stirred. Outside, Catherine waited beside the car, her expression carefully neutral as he emerged from the building. "Successful visit, sir?" she inquired as the driver opened the car door. Maxwell paused, considering the question. "I'm not entirely sure what constitutes success in this context, Catherine, but yes, I believe it was worthwhile." Once settled in the car's plush interior, Maxwell removed the envelope from his pocket, studying his grandmother's handwriting with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Whatever message she had left with Maggie Collins had been intended for a moment of significance, a moment Eleanor herself would never witness. With careful fingers, he broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of paper, unfolding it to reveal a letter written in the same elegant hand as the envelope. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then someone, perhaps Maxwell, has finally connected the threads I always hoped would find each other again someday. Life has a way of bringing together those who are meant to help one another, often when they least expect it, but most need it. You and I have always understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. I worry sometimes that Maxwell will forget this lesson as he grows older in a world that values accumulation over connection. If you're sharing this letter with him now, please remind him that the Bennett fortune began not with investments, but with my father-in-law giving his last dollar to a stranger who needed it more, a stranger who later helped him build the company. That would become Bennett Industries. We are all linked in ways we rarely comprehend. The kindness you show today may create ripples that continue long after we're gone. This is the true legacy I hope to leave my grandson, not buildings with our name, but hearts that remember our compassion. Whatever circumstances have brought this letter to light, know that my love for you and yours transcends time and place. Take care of each other, as we always promised we would. With eternal affection, Eleanor." Maxwell stared at the letter long after he had finished reading it, his grandmother's words resonating with uncomfortable clarity. The story of the Bennett fortune's origins had been sanitized in family tellings, entrepreneurial, vision and strategic investment, replacing the simple human connection his grandmother described. "Sir," Catherine's voice broke through his thoughts. "Where to now?" Maxwell carefully refolded the letter, placing it back in its envelope. "Massachusetts General," he decided. "I need to speak with Dr. Ramirez about expanding our cardiac care initiative." As the car merged into Boston traffic, Maxwell found his thoughts returning to Abby and Maggie Collins, to their small apartment, filled with photographs and memories, to the genuine warmth of their interaction. Despite their modest circumstances, there was a richness there that his penthouse, for all its luxury, conspicuously lacked. For the first time in years, Maxwell Bennett found himself questioning not just his approach to philanthropy, but his entire way of living. The walls his grandmother had feared he was building had indeed become a fortress, one that had protected him from disappointment, but had also isolated him from the very connections that gave life meaning. The realization was uncomfortable, challenging long-held beliefs and carefully constructed defenses. Yet as the Boston skyline came into view, Maxwell felt something unexpected stirring beneath the discomfort, a sense of possibility he had not experienced in longer than he could remember. Chapter 7. Ripples of Change. Massachusetts. General Hospital's cardiac wing buzzed with the controlled intensity of a place where life-altering decisions were made hourly. Maxwell strode through the gleaming corridors, Catherine struggling to keep pace with his uncharacteristically energetic steps. Staff members did double takes as they recognized him. The Bennett name adorned the building's east wing, but the man himself rarely made appearances. "Mr. Bennett." Dr. James Ramirez emerged from a consultation room, surprise evident in his expression. "We weren't expecting you today. Is everything all right?" "Dr. Ramirez," Maxwell acknowledged with a nod. "I need to discuss an expansion of our cardiac care initiative. Do you have a few minutes?" "For you?" "Always," Ramirez replied, gesturing toward his office. "Though I must admit your timing is fortuitous. I was just reviewing the preliminary results from the arrhythmia study your foundation funded. The data is quite promising." In the privacy of Ramirez's office, a space that balanced clinical precision with personal warmth through family photos and children's artwork, Maxwell came directly to the point. "I want to add a patient to the specialized treatment program," he stated without preamble. "Margaret Collins, 78 cardiac arrhythmia, currently under Dr. Martinez's care at Commonwealth Medical." Ramirez blinked, clearly caught off guard by the specific request. "I see. Is Miss Collins a Foundation employee or family friend? Both, in a manner of speaking, Maxwell replied. Her granddaughter is in our vocational program, and Margaret herself was my grandmother's closest friend decades ago. A connection I only recently discovered. The doctor nodded slowly, making notes on his tablet. I'd need to review her medical records, of course, but adding her to the program shouldn't be problematic. We currently have capacity for additional participants. Good, Maxwell said with finality. I want her to receive the best care available, with all expenses covered through the Foundation's research grant. Of course, Ramirez agreed, though I should note that participation requires consent for data collection and follow-up monitoring. Some patients find the process intrusive. They'll understand the requirements, Maxwell assured him, then hesitated before adding, There's one more thing. I'd like you to personally oversee her case. Ramirez's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm primarily a researcher these days, Mr. Bennett. My clinical practice is limited to... I'm aware of your qualifications, Maxwell interrupted. That's precisely why I'm asking. Margaret Collins deserves the best, and you're it. He paused, then added more quietly, This is important to me. James. Personally important. The use of his first name, a rarity in their professional relationship, clearly registered with Ramirez. He studied Maxwell for a moment before nodding. Then I'll make it a priority. Have her record sent over, and we'll schedule a consultation immediately. Thank you. Maxwell rose to leave, then paused. One more thing. This arrangement should be presented as part of our ongoing research initiative, not as a special favor. Understood, Ramirez replied. Dignity matters as much as treatment. Maxwell nodded, appreciating the doctor's perceptiveness. As he turned to leave, Ramirez called after him. Mr. Bennett, if you don't mind my saying so, this is different for you. Usually your involvement with the Foundation's healthcare initiatives is more administrative. Maxwell considered this observation, thinking of his grandmother's letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Perhaps it's time for a more direct approach, he said simply. Back in his car, Maxwell sat in uncharacteristic silence, staring out at the Boston streets without really seeing them. Catherine, sensing his mood, refrained from her usual briefing on upcoming appointments. Cancel my meetings for the remainder of the week, Maxwell said suddenly. And contact the development team. I want to review all our vocational programs, not just the reports, the actual implementation. Site visits, participant interviews, the works. Catherine blinked in surprise but recovered quickly. Of course. Any particular focus for these reviews? Maxwell considered the question. Connection, he said finally. I want to know if we're actually changing lives or just generating statistics. 3 days later, Abby sat in the waiting area outside Dr. Ramirez's office at Massachusetts General. Her grandmother beside her, both women dressed in their best clothes for this important consultation. The marble floors and tasteful artwork of the Cardiac Center spoke of funding levels far beyond Commonwealth Medical's modest clinic. Are you sure about this, Grandma? Abby asked for what must have been the 10th time. We can still explore other options. Maggie patted her granddaughter's hand reassuringly. Eleanor's grandson offered help in a way that maintains our dignity. I believe she would approve. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm rather looking forward to contributing to medical research. Imagine me advancing science at my age. Abby couldn't help but return the smile, her grandmother's positive outlook as infectious as ever. Still, the speed with which everything had been arranged. One phone call to Maxwell's private number, and within hours they had an appointment with one of Boston's top cardiologists, left her feeling slightly off balance. Mrs. Collins? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Ramirez is ready for you now. The consultation proceeded with thoroughness and care, Dr. Ramirez explaining the specialized treatment protocol and answering their questions with patience and clarity. The procedure he recommended, a minimally invasive approach using the latest technology, offered significant advantages over conventional treatments. The recovery time is shorter, and the success rate is substantially higher, he explained, showing them detailed diagrams on his tablet. As participants in our research initiative, you'll receive comprehensive care including all follow-up visits and medications. And the Foundation covers everything, Abby confirmed, still searching for the catch in this seemingly perfect arrangement. Completely, Ramirez assured her. The Bennett Foundation established this program specifically to advance cardiac care while making cutting-edge treatments accessible to patients who might otherwise face financial barriers. Maggie studied the doctor thoughtfully. And how does Maxwell involve himself in all this? Is he hands-on with the medical programs? Something flickered in Ramirez's expression. surprised perhaps at the familiar way she referred to one of Boston's most powerful men. "Mr. Bennett has traditionally maintained oversight from a distance," he replied carefully, "though recently he's shown more direct interest in patient outcomes." After completing the necessary paperwork and scheduling Maggie's procedure for the following week, they exited into the bright autumn afternoon. Abby felt a complex mixture of relief and lingering wariness. "That went well," Maggie observed as they waited for their bus. "Dr. Ramirez seems very competent." "He does," Abby agreed. "I just can't help wondering why Maxwell Bennett is taking such a personal interest in us." Maggie smiled knowingly. Perhaps Eleanor is still working her magic even now. She always did believe in bringing the right people together at the right time. The bus ride back to Somerville gave Abby time to reflect on the whirlwind of recent events. In the span of a few weeks, her life had intersected with one of Boston's most influential figures. Her grandmother's health care had been secured, and her software project had been fast-tracked for the Foundation's showcase. It seemed almost too perfect, like the plot of a movie rather than real life. As they approached their apartment building, Abby was surprised to see a delivery van parked outside, 2 workers unloading what appeared to be a large piece of furniture. "Are the Hendersons getting new things again?" Maggie wondered, referring to their neighbors on the second floor, who frequently bought items on credit only to have them repossessed months later. As they drew closer, one of the workers spotted them. "Mrs. Collins? We have a delivery for you. Apartment 3B, right?" Abby and Maggie exchanged confused glances. "We didn't order anything," Abby said cautiously. "It's already paid for," the man assured them, consulting his clipboard. "Special delivery from Bennett Home Healthcare. We're supposed to set it up for you right away." Bewildered, they followed the workers up to their apartment, watching as they carefully maneuvered a state-of-the-art adjustable bed through the door and proceeded to assemble it in place of Maggie's old bed. "There's a note," one worker said, handing Abby an envelope once they had completed the installation and demonstration. After the delivery team departed, Abby opened the envelope to find a handwritten note. "Maggie, Dr. Ramirez mentioned that proper rest would be essential for your recovery. I hope this makes the process more comfortable. Helena would never forgive me if I didn't ensure you were properly looked after. Maxwell." "Well," Maggie said, testing the bed's adjustable features with evident delight, "he certainly inherited Eleanor's tendency for practical generosity. She once replaced my entire kitchen set after I mentioned a drawer was sticking." "Grandma, this is too much," Abby protested weakly, even as she noted how much more comfortable and accessible the new bed would be for her grandmother. "Nonsense," Maggie replied pragmatically. "It's exactly what's needed, no more and no less. That's thoughtful giving, not excessive charity." She patted the space beside her. "Come sit. We need to talk about something." Abby joined her grandmother on the edge of the bed, noting the serious shift in her tone. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about Maxwell's visit," Maggie began. "About how Eleanor would feel seeing her grandson now, so successful yet so isolated." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He reminds me of a turtle that's built its shell so thick it's forgotten how to feel the sun." The poetic observation was typical of her grandmother's wisdom. "What does that have to do with us?" Abby asked. "Eleanor once told me that wealth can be the thickest wall between people, whether you're on the side that has it or the side that doesn't," Maggie explained. "I think Maxwell has been hiding behind that wall for a long time, and now for whatever reason he's peeking over it. So what are you suggesting?" Abby asked, sensing her grandmother had a specific point in mind. "That perhaps we have something to give him in return," Maggie said simply. "Not money or things, but connection, perspective." She smiled at Abby's puzzled expression. "I'm saying we should invite him to dinner. Get a proper home-cooked meal with conversation that has nothing to do with foundations or programs or medical procedures." Abby stared at her grandmother in disbelief. "You want to invite one of Boston's wealthiest men to our tiny apartment for dinner?" "Grandma, he probably has personal chefs." "All the more reason," Maggie replied with conviction. "Eleanor used to say that Maxwell had everything money could buy, and too little of what it couldn't." Despite her initial resistance, Abby found herself calling Maxwell's private number the next day, extending the dinner invitation with a mixture of awkwardness and determination. His surprised acceptance, after a moment of what sounded like genuine bafflement, left her scrambling to plan a meal worthy of a man accustomed to the finest restaurants. "Just make my pot roast recipe," Maggie advised calmly. "It was always Eleanor's favorite. She said it tasted like home." The evening of the dinner arrived with unexpected swiftness. Abby had spent hours cleaning their already tidy apartment, hiding the small indicators of financial strain, and preparing the meal according to her grandmother's exacting instructions. She'd even splurged on a tablecloth and fresh flowers, a small extravagance that had made Maggie smile approvingly. When the buzzer sounded at exactly 7 o'clock, Abby took a deep breath before pressing the button to unlock the entry door. Minutes later, a knock announced their guest's arrival. Maxwell Bennett stood in their doorway, looking simultaneously commanding and oddly uncertain. He wore what appeared to be his idea of casual clothing, perfectly tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Abby's monthly rent, and carried a small gift bag and a bouquet of flowers. "Thank you for the invitation," he said formally, handing the flowers to Abby and the gift bag to Maggie. "I hope I'm not too early." "You're right on time," Maggie assured him warmly. "Please come in and make yourself comfortable." As Maxwell entered their modest living space, Abby noticed him taking in details: the carefully mended curtains, the collection of well-worn books, the family photographs spanning generations. There was no judgment in his observation, only a quiet curiosity. "Something smells wonderful," he commented, following Maggie toward their small dining area, where the table was set for 3. "Abby made my famous pot roast," Maggie informed him proudly. "Eleanor always said it was better than any fancy restaurant meal." "She mentioned that in her journals," Maxwell said, surprising both women. "She wrote about Sunday dinners at your apartment, how they were the highlight of her week." Maggie's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "Did she really? How wonderful to know she treasured those times as much as I did." As they settled around the table, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to more natural conversation. Maxwell, Abby noticed, seemed to relax incrementally throughout the meal, his formal posture softening, his responses becoming less measured and more genuine. "This is extraordinary," he declared after his first bite of the pot roast. "I understand why my grandmother wrote about it so enthusiastically. The secret is patience," Maggie explained. "You can't rush good cooking, just like you can't rush most worthwhile things in life." Maxwell seemed to consider this simple wisdom with unexpected seriousness, a principle not particularly valued in today's business world, unfortunately. "Perhaps that's the problem with today's business world," Maggie suggested gently. The conversation flowed more easily than Abby had anticipated, ranging from reminiscences about Eleanor to discussions of neighborhood changes over decades to current events. Maxwell, she realized with surprise, was actually listening, not with the polite attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with genuine interest in their perspectives. When Maggie shared stories of Eleanor's practical approaches to helping neighbors during tough times, organizing skill exchanges rather than handouts, creating community gardens in vacant lots, Maxwell leaned forward in his chair, absorbing details about a side of his grandmother he had clearly never fully understood. "She never saw helping others as charity," Maggie explained. "It was community, the natural flow of giving and receiving that keeps everyone connected. That differs somewhat from current philanthropic models," Maxwell observed with a hint of irony. "Maybe current models could use some old-fashioned wisdom. Then," Abby suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Instead of taking offense, Maxwell nodded thoughtfully. "You may be right." After dinner, as Abby cleared the dishes despite Maxwell's offers to help, Maggie opened the gift bag he had brought. Inside was an elegant wooden box containing an assortment of recipe cards yellowed with age. "Eleanor's recipes," Maxwell explained, as Maggie examined them with wide eyes. "I found them in storage. Many mentioned you Maggie's preferred version, or not as good as Maggie's, but close." "Oh my," Maggie whispered, handling the cards with reverence. "What a treasure. Thank you for sharing these." "They belong with someone who appreciates their value," Maxwell replied simply. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Maxwell stood by the window overlooking the street below, a cup of coffee in hand. "You have a real home here," he observed quietly to Abby, who had joined him while Maggie examined the recipe cards more closely. "It's nothing fancy," Abby replied, slightly defensive. "That's not what I meant," Maxwell clarified. "A home isn't about square footage or furnishings. It's about belonging, connection." He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "Every object here has a story, a purpose. Everything matters." The observation surprised Abby with its perception. "I never thought about it that way. I have 3,000 square feet overlooking the harbor," Maxwell continued, his voice low enough that Maggie couldn't hear, "and nothing in it that couldn't be replaced tomorrow without a second thought." The admission carried a vulnerability that Abby hadn't expected from this powerful man. Before she could respond, Maggie called them back to the table for dessert. A simple apple crisp that Maxwell declared better than anything served in Boston's finest establishments. As the evening concluded, and Maxwell prepared to leave, Maggie embraced him warmly. "Don't be a stranger now. Eleanor would want us to stay connected." "I'd like that," Maxwell replied with surprising sincerity. At the door, he turned to Abby. "Thank you for this evening. It was illuminating." After he had gone, Abby and Maggie sat together on the sofa, processing the unexpected success of the dinner. "He's lonely," Maggie observed simply. "All that success, all that power, and he's starving for genuine connection." "It's hard to feel sorry for someone with his resources," Abby pointed out. "Is it?" Maggie asked quietly. "Wealth can feed the body, but not necessarily the soul." Eleanor understood that. "I think Maxwell is just beginning to learn it." Across the city, in his penthouse overlooking the harbor, Maxwell Bennett stood at his window, the lights of Boston spread before him like earthbound stars. For the first time in years, the view failed to provide its usual satisfaction. Instead, his thoughts remained in a modest Somerville apartment where 3 people had shared a meal, stories, and genuine conversation. The evening had affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. In the Collins small home, he had glimpsed something his wealth had insulated him from, the richness that comes from necessity, from choosing carefully what matters, from maintaining connections across time and circumstance. "Computer, access personal journal," he instructed, settling into his chair. "Journal ready," the system responded. "Audio or text input?" "Text," Maxwell decided, fingers poised over the keyboard. For a long moment he stared at the blank document, struggling to articulate the complex emotions the evening had stirred. Finally he began to type. "Tonight, I experienced what Eleanor might have called true wealth, a meal prepared with care, conversation without agenda, memories freely shared. In Maggie Collins, I see echoes of my grandmother's wisdom. In Abby, I recognize something I lost long ago, the ability to remain open to possibility without cynicism. I find myself questioning whether the walls I've built for protection have instead become a prison. Perhaps it's time to consider what success actually means." Maxwell paused, then added a final line. "Eleanor once wrote that the purpose of privilege is not accumulation, but contribution. I'm beginning to understand what she meant." Chapter 8. The Showcase. The Bennett Foundation's annual innovation. Showcase transformed the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel into a gleaming testament to philanthropy's power. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegant displays, highlighting the Foundation's initiatives, from educational programs to healthcare innovations to community development projects. Boston's elite circulated through the space, champagne flutes in hand, admiring the polished presentations of carefully selected success stories. In a quiet corner behind one of the displays, Abby Collins smoothed her borrowed dress for the 10th time in as many minutes, trying to calm her racing heart. The navy blue cocktail dress, loaned by Jessica Turner after learning Abby had nothing suitable for such a prestigious event, fit reasonably well despite being slightly loose in the shoulders. Paired with her grandmother's pearl earrings and sensible black heels purchased from a consignment shop, she looked presentable if not quite at home among the designer-clad attendees. 5 minutes until your presentation slot, Kyle Reeves informed her, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Abby, who accepted it gratefully. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Abby admitted, taking a careful sip. "Half the tech industry in Boston is out there, not to mention potential investors." Kyle smiled encouragingly. "Your application is solid, Abby. You've done the work. Now just tell them why it matters." Across the ballroom, Maxwell Bennett moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about the Foundation's latest initiatives. To casual observers, he appeared every bit the confident philanthropist, showcasing his organization's accomplishments. Only Catherine Wells, shadowing him as always, noticed the subtle differences in his demeanor, the way his gaze continually drifted toward the technology section where Abby's presentation would soon begin, the slight distraction in his responses to even the most important guests. "Senator Harrington is hoping for a word about the education bill," Catherine murmured as they momentarily stepped aside from the crowd. Maxwell nodded absently. "Schedule him for lunch next week. Tonight I want to focus on our program participants." "Of course," Catherine agreed, making a note on her tablet. "Ms. Collins's presentation begins in 5 minutes. The technology showcase area is prepared." "And Maggie?" Maxwell asked. "Was transportation arranged as requested?" "Your personal driver collected her an hour ago. She's seated in the reserved section near the presentation area. Maxwell nodded, satisfied. The elder Collins had undergone her cardiac procedure 2 weeks earlier, with remarkably positive results. Dr. Ramirez had reported her recovery was proceeding exceptionally well, though she still tired easily. Maxwell had insisted on providing comfortable transportation to ensure she could attend Abby's moment of recognition. "Mr. Bennett," called Bradley Wilson, CEO of one of Boston's largest investment firms. "Spectacular event as always. I'm particularly interested in the microfinance initiative you're launching in Dorchester." Maxwell engaged in the obligatory conversation, while mentally counting down the minutes until he could politely excuse himself. Wilson was a significant donor whose support was valuable to the foundation, but tonight, Maxwell found his typical networking responsibilities unusually burdensome. "We should continue this discussion soon," Maxwell said finally, spotting his opportunity as the lights dimmed slightly in the technology showcase area. "Perhaps at next week's economic forum. I believe we're both on the panel." With a promise to connect later, Maxwell extricated himself and made his way toward the gathering crowd around the technology displays. He positioned himself at the back, preferring to observe without drawing attention to his specific interest in Abby's presentation. The technology showcase moderator, a well-known industry journalist, stepped onto the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Bennett Foundation is proud to present innovations developed through our vocational training programs. These projects represent not just technical achievement, but meaningful social impact. First up, we have Abigail Collins presenting Community Care, a platform designed to revolutionize volunteer matching." Abby walked onto the stage with carefully measured steps, her expression composed despite the slight tremor in her hands as she connected her laptop to the presentation system. Maxwell found himself holding his breath as she faced the audience, wondering if the pressure of the moment would overwhelm her. "Good evening," Abby began, her voice initially soft before she adjusted the microphone and continued with greater confidence. "How many of you have wanted to volunteer your time or skills, but found the process of connecting with the right opportunity too cumbersome? And how many organizations here have struggled to find volunteers with exactly the skills you need when you need them?" Several hands raised throughout the audience, and Abby nodded in acknowledgement. Community Care addresses this disconnect by creating a dynamic matching system that considers not just availability and location, but skill levels, interests, and specific community needs. As she moved through her presentation, demonstrating the application's features with clear explanations and practical examples, Maxwell observed a transformation. The nervous young woman who had stepped on stage was replaced by a confident developer who clearly believed in her creation's potential to make meaningful difference. The audience responded to her authenticity, their initial polite attention developing into genuine engagement as she explained how the system could scale from neighborhood initiatives to citywide programs. "What separates Community Care from existing volunteer platforms," Abby explained, "is its focus on building lasting community connections rather than just filling immediate needs. The system learns from each successful match to improve future recommendations, creating a virtuous cycle of community engagement." When she opened the floor for questions, hands shot up throughout the audience. Maxwell watched with growing pride as Abby fielded each inquiry with thoughtfulness and clarity, neither overselling the application's capabilities nor underselling its potential impact. "What's your monetization strategy?" asked a sharp-suited venture capitalist from the front row. "Volunteer coordination is notoriously difficult to build a sustainable business model around." Abby nodded, acknowledging the challenge. Community Care operates on a tiered model. Individual volunteers always access the platform for free, while organizations can choose between a basic free tier or premium subscriptions that offer advanced analytics and integration features. Additionally, corporate social responsibility programs can sponsor community access, creating a sustainable ecosystem that keeps the platform accessible to all while generating sufficient revenue for ongoing development. The answer, pragmatic yet principled, drew approving nods from several potential investors. Maxwell noted with interest that Abby had clearly refined her thinking about the business aspects since their first conversation, developing a model that balanced sustainability with accessibility. As the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, Maxwell remained at the back of the crowd, observing as several attendees immediately approached Abby with business cards and questions. From his vantage point, he could see Maggie Collins seated in the reserved section, her face glowing with unmistakable pride as she watched her granddaughter navigate this new terrain with growing confidence. "She's impressive," Catherine commented quietly, appearing at Maxwell's side. "The application has genuine potential, and she presents it well." "Yes," Maxwell agreed simply, though impressive hardly captured his assessment of what he'd just witnessed. Abby had demonstrated not just technical skill, but a fundamental understanding of community needs, the human element that technology often overlooked. "Several investors are already expressing interest," Catherine continued, checking notifications on her tablet. "Harrison from Beacon Ventures is particularly enthusiastic." Maxwell frowned slightly. "Harrison focuses on rapid scaling and early acquisition. That's not necessarily the right path for this type of community-focused application. It would certainly be lucrative for Ms. Collins," Catherine pointed out. "Perhaps," Maxwell conceded, "but potentially at the cost of the platform's original purpose." Before Catherine could respond, Jessica Turner approached, looking slightly harried despite her polished appearance. "Mr. Bennett, the press is requesting a photo with you and some of our successful program participants, including Abby. Would now be convenient?" Maxwell nodded, following Jessica toward a backdrop displaying the Foundation's logo, where several program graduates waited. Abby stood slightly apart, still engaged in conversation with an interested attendee. When she noticed Maxwell's approach, she quickly concluded her discussion and joined the group. "Congratulations on an excellent presentation," Maxwell said, as they waited for the photographer to arrange the shot. "You've generated significant interest." "Thank you," Abby replied, her eyes bright with the adrenaline of success. "I've already received 3 potential partnership offers and several investment inquiries. It's overwhelming, honestly." "Don't rush into any decisions," Maxwell advised. "The right partnership is more important than the most lucrative one." Abby studied him with that direct gaze that always seemed to see more than most people. "Is that what you do in my position?" The question gave Maxwell pause. Would he have prioritized purpose over profit at her age? Before he could formulate a response, the photographer called for their attention, and the moment for honesty passed. After the photos, Maxwell made his way to where Maggie sat observing the proceedings, her expression serene despite the evident fatigue around her eyes. "Margaret," he greeted her, taking the seat beside her. In the weeks since their dinner, they had established a first-name basis that felt both novel and strangely familiar to Maxwell. "How are you feeling?" "Well enough to witness my granddaughter shine," Maggie replied with a smile. "Though I'll admit these occasions are more taxing than they once were. Would you like me to arrange for the driver to take you home?" Maxwell offered. Maggie shook her head. "Not yet. I want to see this through properly." She patted his hand with surprising familiarity. "Eleanor would be bursting with pride tonight, not just for Abby but for you as well." "For me?" Maxwell asked, genuinely surprised. "I've merely provided the platform." "You've done far more than that," Maggie countered gently. "You've begun connecting again, seeing the people behind the programs. That's what Eleanor always hoped you would do with your influence." The observation struck closer to home than Maxwell cared to admit. Before he could respond, Abby joined them, her professional composure momentarily giving way to excitement as she knelt beside her grandmother's chair. "Grandma, Mr. Harrison from Beacon Ventures wants to schedule a meeting next week. He says community care could potentially scale to cities across the country with the right backing." "That's wonderful, dear," Maggie replied, though Maxwell noted a flicker of concern cross her face. "What would that mean for your original vision for the platform?" Abby's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Well, there would be some changes to the business model, naturally. More emphasis on premium features that generate revenue. But the core functionality would remain accessible. Sometimes core values get lost in scaling," Maggie observed gently. "Just something to consider before signing anything." Maxwell watched this exchange with interest, noting how Maggie's simple question had prompted Abby to reconsider her initial excitement. The wisdom in her approach, guiding without dictating, reminded him powerfully of his grandmother's methods. As the evening progressed, Maxwell found himself increasingly drawn into conversations about Abby's project, subtly steering interested investors toward approaches that would preserve the application's community focus, rather than prioritizing rapid monetization. It was an unusual role for him. Typically, he remained above such specific involvement, allowing Foundation staff to manage participant outcomes. Near the event's conclusion, Maxwell noticed Abby standing alone by one of the large windows overlooking Copley Square, momentarily withdrawn from the networking that had consumed her evening. "Feeling overwhelmed?" he asked, joining her by the window. Abby smiled ruefully. Is it that obvious? I should be elated right now, but instead I feel conflicted about the interest in your application. She nodded, gazing out at the illuminated facade of the Boston Public Library across the square. 6 weeks ago, I was just hoping to create something useful for local community centers. Now there's talk of venture capital, national scaling, acquisition potential. She shook her head. It's happening so fast that I'm worried about losing control of what matters most about the project. Maxwell considered her concern. Growth and integrity aren't mutually exclusive, but maintaining both requires very careful navigation. Do you have any advice? Abby asked directly. You've built something massive while keeping your foundational mission intact. The question caught Maxwell off guard, not because it was presumptuous, but because it assumed a success. He had recently begun questioning himself. Had he truly kept his foundational mission intact, or had he allowed the institution to become a substitute for the personal engagement his grandmother had valued? Take your time, he said finally. The right partners will respect your vision, rather than seeking to replace it with theirs. And remember that technical solutions only work when they address genuine human needs, something your application does exceptionally well. Abby nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, not just for the advice, but for everything you've done for me and Grandma. It's changed our lives. Your grandmother would say that connections are meant to be mutually beneficial, Maxwell replied with a small smile. In this case, I believe she'd be right. Before Abby could respond, Catherine approached with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the mayor has arrived and is asking to speak with you, Mr. Bennett. Maxwell nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to Abby. Would you and your grandmother join me for dinner next week? There's something I'd like to discuss regarding your project's future. Of course, Abby agreed, curiosity evident in her expression. As Maxwell moved away to fulfill his obligations as host, he found himself evaluating the evening through an unfamiliar lens. Traditionally, he measured the showcase's success by metrics: funds raised, media coverage, new partnerships established. Tonight, however, his satisfaction came primarily from witnessing Abby's achievement and Maggie's pride, human moments that statistics could never capture. Later that evening, after ensuring Maggie and Abby had been safely delivered home in his personal car, Maxwell stood on his penthouse balcony, the cool night air a welcome respite after the crowded event. The city spread before him as always, but somehow the view seemed different, less like a kingdom to be observed from above, and more like a community of which he was part. His phone chimed with a message from Catherine, summarizing the event's outcomes in bullet points. Funds raised, media mentions, notable connections made, all excellent results by objective standards. Yet Maxwell found himself more interested in the brief message that followed from Abby. Grandma wanted me to tell you she's already planning the menu for next week. Apparently, there's a recipe of Eleanor's she's been waiting for the right moment to try. Thank you again for tonight. Maxwell smiled, tucking the phone away and gazing out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward not to a business engagement or foundation event, but to a simple dinner with people who saw him as a person rather than a resource. The realization was both unsettling and oddly liberating, a reminder of his grandmother's insistence that true wealth came from connection rather than accumulation. As a cool breeze swept across the balcony, Maxwell Bennett found himself considering possibilities he hadn't entertained in decades, changes not just to his foundation's approach, but to his own life, his own way of being in the world. It was, he realized with surprise, the first time in years he had thought about his personal future with something approaching hope, rather than mere strategic planning. The sensation was unfamiliar enough to be almost uncomfortable, and yet, as he returned inside to his expansive but empty penthouse, he found himself unwilling to let it go. Chapter 9. Full Circle. 6 months had transformed the Bennett Foundation's Charlestown Vocational Center almost beyond recognition. What had once been a utilitarian space, focused solely on skills development, had evolved into something closer to a community hub. The formerly stark hallways now displayed student artwork and project showcases. The cafeteria had been redesigned into a welcoming communal space where program participants and staff shared meals at large, family-style tables. Most significantly, the security cameras that had once monitored every interaction had been quietly reduced to only those necessary for basic building safety. Maxwell Bennett moved through these transformed spaces, nodding in greeting to students and instructors who no longer fell silent when he appeared. His visits, once rare enough to cause disruption, had become regular enough to be merely noteworthy rather than alarming. The community garden project is exceeding expectations, Jessica Turner reported, as they toured the newly developed rooftop space where culinary students grew vegetables and herbs for use in their program. We've already had 3 neighborhood associations request consultation on starting similar initiatives. Excellent, Maxwell replied, pausing to examine the thriving raised beds where early spring plantings were beginning to emerge. As the community meal program, serving over 200 people weekly now, Jessica confirmed. The partnership with local senior centers has been particularly successful. Many recipients have actually become volunteers themselves, offering cooking classes or helping with distribution. Maxwell nodded, pleased with the program's evolution from a simple meal service into a more reciprocal community exchange, exactly the kind of connection building his grandmother had championed. And the community care implementation, how is that proceeding? Jessica's smile widened. I think you should see that for yourself. Abby's waiting in the tech lab. They made their way to the software development space, where the atmosphere of focused energy was immediately apparent. Students worked collaboratively at clustered workstations, the traditional classroom configuration having been abandoned in favor of a more studio-like environment. Near the center of the room, Abby stood before a large screen, guiding a small group through what appeared to be a training session. And the neighborhood-specific matching algorithm means volunteers are more likely to serve communities they're already connected to, she was explaining as Maxwell and Jessica approached. We've seen a 40% increase in retention when people volunteer within their own neighborhoods. The small group, representatives from various community organizations, based on their attire and the notebooks they clutched, listened with evident interest, several nodding in agreement with Abby's observations. Ah, Mr. Bennett. Abby acknowledged him with a warm smile that held none of the nervousness that had characterized their early interactions. Perfect timing. We're just wrapping up the community care orientation for our newest partner organizations. Maxwell nodded in greeting to the assembled group. I hope you're finding the platform useful for your work. It's been transformative, responded an older woman wearing a name tag identifying her as the director of a Dorchester senior center. We've connected with volunteers we would never have found through traditional channels. Last week, a software engineer helped us set up a computer lab for our seniors using equipment the Bennett Foundation donated. The real magic is in the follow-through, added another participant, a young man representing a youth development program. Most volunteer platforms match people once and that's it. This system builds relationships over time. Maxwell listened to their feedback with genuine interest, noting how Abby seamlessly facilitated the discussion, drawing out specific examples, addressing concerns, and suggesting refinements based on user experiences. In the 6 months since the showcase, she had developed not just as a programmer but as a leader, guiding community care's implementation across dozens of Boston area organizations. When the session concluded and the visitors departed, Abby approached Maxwell with a tablet, displaying the platform's latest metrics. We're seeing exactly the pattern we hoped for, she explained, swiping through several graphs. Initial volunteer engagement leading to sustained participation, and increasingly, to community members crossing over from service recipients to contributors. Just as you predicted, Maxwell noted with approval. It's how genuine communities have always worked, Abby replied with a shrug. People support others when needed, then contribute when they can. The technology just makes the connections easier. Jessica excused herself to handle another matter, leaving Maxwell and Abby to continue discussing the platform's development. As they walked toward her workstation, Maxwell observed the subtle changes in Abby since their first meeting. The increased confidence in her posture, the professional assurance in her explanations, yet with the same fundamental authenticity that had initially caught his attention. "How is your grandmother?" he asked, as their technical discussion reached a natural pause. Abby's expression brightened. "Thriving, actually. Dr. Ramirez says her heart function has improved beyond his expectations. She's talking about volunteering at the community garden once the weather gets warmer." "I'm glad to hear it," Maxwell said sincerely. She mentioned interest in the historical documentation project as well. The project, an initiative to record the stories of Boston's older residents, particularly focusing on neighborhood changes and community building across generations, had been Maggie's suggestion during one of the now regular dinners she and Abby shared with Maxwell. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Maxwell had implemented the idea within weeks, allocating foundation resources to what he would previously have dismissed as a soft outcome, with limited measurable impact. She's already recorded 3 sessions, Abby confirmed. The oral history team says her recall of Boston in the 1950s and 60s is remarkably detailed. She's even convinced some of her friends to participate. That doesn't surprise me in the least, Maxwell remarked with a smile. Your grandmother has a gift for bringing people together. Speaking of which, Abby said, checking the time, we should probably head out if we're going to make it to lunch. Grandma texted earlier to say she's already at the cafe. The cafe in question, a small, family-owned establishment in Cambridge that Maggie had frequented, in her younger years had become their regular meeting place for casual conversations, outside the formal structure of foundation events or home dinners. Its worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs offered a comfortable neutrality that Maxwell had come to appreciate, a place where he was neither benefactor nor guest, but simply one of 3 people sharing a meal and conversation. As they walked toward the exit, Maxwell noticed Kyle Reeves working with a student in the corner of the lab. The instructor caught his eye and gave a quick nod of acknowledgement, a gesture between colleagues, rather than the deferential greeting he would have offered 6 months earlier. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the air, a welcome change after Boston's long winter. Maxwell had begun walking more in recent months, initially at Maggie's insistence that seeing the city at ground level changes your perspective. She had been right, of course. The 20-minute walk from the vocational center to the cafe offered views of Boston he had forgotten or never properly noticed. The way morning light played across brick buildings, the community-tended flowers appearing in window boxes, the small interactions between neighbors that constituted the city's true rhythm. I had an interesting call yesterday, Abby mentioned as they walked. Harrison from Beacon Ventures. He's still interested in acquiring community care. Oh? Maxwell kept his tone neutral despite his immediate concern. Beacon Ventures was known for acquiring promising social impact platforms and pivoting them toward more lucrative business models, often at the expense of their original mission. What did you tell him? That I appreciated his interest, but community care isn't for sale, Abby replied simply. The Foundation's social enterprise structure is working perfectly for balanced growth while maintaining our core values. Maxwell nodded, relief mingling with pride at her decision. The social enterprise structure, she mentioned, had been his suggestion during their dinner, following the showcase, a hybrid model where community care operated as an independent entity under the Foundation's umbrella, generating sustainable revenue while remaining true to its community-focused mission. It allowed Abby to draw a reasonable salary as executive director while ensuring the platform remained accessible to organizations regardless of their financial resources. Harrison offered quite a substantial amount, Maxwell observed. Knowing the venture capitalist's reputation for aggressive acquisitions, Abby smiled, shaking her head slightly. He did. Enough to buy Grandma a proper house and set up a comfortable retirement fund. But some things aren't about the money. Not everyone would make that choice, Maxwell noted. Maybe not, Abby acknowledged. But I keep thinking about what Grandma and Eleanor would say. They'd probably tell me that genuine security doesn't come from a bank balance, but from being part of a community that cares for its members. The sentiment echoed Eleanor's journal so precisely that Maxwell wondered if Maggie had shared similar wisdom with her granddaughter. Your grandmother is very proud of you, you know, he said as they waited at a crosswalk. Not just for your success, but for how you've achieved it. I know, Abby replied softly. Though sometimes I think she's equally proud of you these days. The observation caught Maxwell off guard. Me? Why would she be proud of me? Abby gave him a sidelong glance as they crossed the street. For the changes you've made to the Foundation. For becoming more directly involved. For remembering what Eleanor taught you. Maxwell fell silent, considering her words. The past 6 months had indeed brought significant changes. Not just to the Foundation's programs, but to his personal approach to philanthropy. Weekly site visits had replaced distant monitoring. Participant input now guided program development rather than merely informing it. The Foundation's board had initially questioned these shifts, concerned about efficiency and scalability, until the improved outcomes had become impossible to ignore. It's not entirely altruistic, Maxwell admitted as they approached the cafe. I've found I actually enjoy the direct involvement. It provides perspective. Abby smiled knowingly but didn't press the point. As they entered the cafe, Maxwell spotted Maggie already seated at their usual corner table, engaged in animated conversation with the cafe owner's elderly mother, a recent participant in the historical documentation project, based on the recording equipment visible on the table. Maxwell, Abby! Maggie called, waving them over with the energetic enthusiasm that had returned as her health improved. Maria has the most wonderful stories about this neighborhood in the 1960s. Did you know Eleanor used to bring cookies to the original owner every Sunday after church? I didn't, Maxwell replied, settling into one of the wooden chairs as Abby greeted both women with warm hugs. Oh yes, Maria confirmed with a nod that set her silver earrings swinging. Such a kind woman, your grandmother. Always asking about my children, remembering their names and interests. Not like most of the wealthy folks who passed through. She saw people, really saw them. The description aligned perfectly with the grandmother revealed in Eleanor's journals, the woman who had valued connection above status, who had recognized the dignity in everyone she encountered. The woman Maxwell had glimpsed in his childhood, before allowing the world's cynicism to cloud his perception. As lunch progressed, Maxwell found himself more observer than participant, watching the easy interaction between Maggie, Abby, and the cafe regulars who stopped by their table to say hello. There was a natural community here, people whose lives had intersected over years or decades, creating a tapestry of shared experiences and mutual support. Penny, for your thoughts? Maggie asked, noticing his contemplative silence as Abby stepped away to take a phone call. Maxwell smiled slightly. I was just thinking about community, how it forms, why it matters. My grandmother understood that instinctively, I think. It's taken me considerably longer. Eleanor always said wisdom was rarely achieved on schedule, Maggie replied with a knowing smile. The important thing is that it arrives eventually. She would have loved seeing community care develop, Maxwell observed. The technology would have baffled her, but the purpose behind it would have resonated perfectly. Oh, I think she's seeing it, Maggie said with conviction. Eleanor always believed that love and connection transcended ordinary limitations. That the ripples of good work continue outward in ways we can't always track or measure. The sentiment might have struck Maxwell as fanciful once, but recent months had softened his skepticism. He had witnessed too many coincidences, connecting his grandmother's past with his present path, to dismiss the possibility entirely. When Abby returned to the table, her expression held barely contained excitement. That was Dr. Ramirez, she explained. The preliminary results from Grandma's treatment protocol are being published next month. The approach is showing significantly better outcomes than conventional methods across all test groups. That's wonderful news, Maxwell replied, genuinely pleased. He said something interesting, Abby continued, her gaze meeting Maxwell's directly. Apparently, the funding you directed toward the Cardiac Research Initiative 6 months ago has accelerated the timeline for making this treatment widely available. They're estimating it could help thousands of patients with similar conditions over the next few years. Maxwell nodded, absorbing the information with a complex mixture of satisfaction and humility. What had begun as a targeted intervention to help Maggie specifically had expanded into something with far broader impact, exactly the kind of ripple effect Maggie had just described. See, Maggie said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Connections matter. One decision, one relationship restored, and the effects multiply beyond calculation. After lunch, as they walked toward the car, Maxwell had arranged to take Maggie to her weekly bridge game. The conversation turned to plans for expanding community care to additional cities. The pilot in Providence is going well, Abby reported. They've already matched over 300 volunteers with community organizations in just 8 weeks. And the local leadership model is working? Maxwell asked. Abby nodded enthusiastically. Exactly as we hoped. Each city has a coordinator who understands the specific community dynamics, while the core platform provides the technical infrastructure. It's the perfect balance of standardization and customization, rather like the Foundation's new approach overall, Maggie observed with approval. As they reached the waiting car, Maxwell found himself reflecting on the profound shifts of the past 6 months. The Bennett Foundation had evolved from a distant, data-driven philanthropic entity into something more directly connected with the communities it served. Efficiency metrics still mattered, but they now existed alongside less quantifiable measures of success, the strength of relationships formed, the resilience of communities supported, the dignity afforded to all participants in the process. Will you be joining us for dinner on Sunday? Maggie asked as the driver held the car door for her. I'm making Eleanor's famous pot roast again. I think I've finally perfected her technique. I wouldn't miss it, Maxwell assured her. The weekly Sunday dinners at the Collins apartment had become a fixture in his calendar, appointments that took precedence over board meetings and fundraising galas. After seeing Maggie off, Maxwell and Abby began walking toward the tea station where they would part ways. She to return to the vocational center, he to attend a meeting at the Foundation's main office. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Abby said as they walked. "The Historical Documentation Project has been collecting stories about neighborhoods throughout Boston, including Back Bay where your family lived. Would you consider recording some of your own memories? Perspectives from different socioeconomic backgrounds are important for a complete picture." Maxwell considered the request thoughtfully. "I'm not sure my childhood recollections would add much value. We lived rather insulated lives." "That's precisely why your perspective matters," Abby countered. "And besides, you could share memories of Eleanor that no one else has." The mention of his grandmother gave Maxwell pause. There were indeed stories he could share, small moments of wisdom and kindness that had shaped him more than he had realized until recently. "I'll consider it," he promised. As they reached the station, Abby's phone chimed with a message. She checked it quickly, then looked up with a smile. The community center in Roxbury just matched with a volunteer graphic designer through Community Care. They've been trying to update their materials for months but couldn't afford professional help. "Another connection made," Maxwell observed, finding genuine satisfaction in this small success story, the kind of outcome that would never make headlines but represented the platform's true purpose. "Exactly," Abby agreed. "One ripple at a time." As they parted ways, Maxwell found himself taking an unplanned detour. Instead of heading directly to his office, he walked toward the public garden, finding a bench in the spring sunshine where he could observe families and individuals enjoying the warming weather. He removed his phone from his pocket and opened the secure folder where he kept digitized versions of Eleanor's journals. Scrolling through the entries, he found one he had returned to repeatedly in recent months. "Today I took Maxwell to the community garden project on Commonwealth Avenue. At first, he couldn't understand why anyone would grow vegetables in the city when they could simply buy them at the store. It's inefficient," he declared with all the seriousness an 8-year-old can muster. But by the end of our visit, after helping Mrs. Abernathy harvest tomatoes and learning how the neighbors share their different crops, he saw something beyond efficiency. "It's like they're all taking care of each other," he observed on our walk home. "Precisely, my clever boy, precisely." Maxwell smiled at the memory, one that had been lost to his conscious recollection until reading the journal entry. His grandmother had been teaching him about community and connection long before he had words for those concepts, lessons he had temporarily forgotten but was now reclaiming. Rising from the bench, Maxwell continued toward his office, moving through the city with a different awareness than he had possessed a year earlier. He noticed the small interactions between strangers at crosswalks, the community bulletin boards with their overlapping notices, the chalk drawings on sidewalks marking children's play areas. The complex web of human connection that constituted a thriving city had always been there, but he had observed it from such distance that the essential details had become invisible. As he approached the Bennett Foundation headquarters, Maxwell paused to study the building itself, the gleaming glass tower he had commissioned to represent transparency yet imposing presence. With fresh eyes, he could see how the architecture itself embodied his former approach, visible but inaccessible, present yet removed. Inside, Catherine greeted him with her usual efficiency. "The board members are assembled in the conference room for the quarterly review. They're particularly interested in discussing the metrics from the revised vocational programs." "Thank you, Catherine," Maxwell replied, gathering the materials for the presentation he would deliver. As he entered the conference room, where the Foundation's board awaited his report, Maxwell felt an unusual sense of clarity about the task before him. These business leaders and philanthropists had been selected for their strategic thinking and financial acumen, qualities that remained valuable, but no longer constituted the Foundation's sole guiding principles. "Good afternoon," he began, taking his place at the head of the table. "Before we review the quarterly metrics, I'd like to share a story my grandmother wrote in her journal nearly 45 years ago, a story that I believe captures the true purpose behind everything we are trying to accomplish." As Maxwell began reading Eleanor's account of the community garden visit, he observed the board members' expressions shift from polite attention to genuine interest. The simple wisdom of his grandmother's observation, filtered through a child's perspective and now reclaimed by the man he had become, offered a framework for understanding the Foundation's evolving approach. "The metrics you'll see today reflect improvements across all traditional measures of success," Maxwell continued after finishing the journal excerpt. "Increased participant retention, higher program completion rates, improved employment outcomes. But they also include new measurements we've begun tracking: community engagement levels, reciprocal volunteer relationships, sustained connections beyond program completion. As the presentation progressed, Maxwell found himself speaking with a conviction that came from direct experience rather than abstract principles. The changes implemented over the past 6 months weren't merely theoretical adjustments, but practical improvements he had witnessed firsthand. In essence, he concluded, we're returning to my grandmother's original vision, building community, not just providing services, creating connections, not just funding programs. The results, both quantifiable and qualitative, suggest this approach not only honors her intentions, but actually produces better outcomes by conventional standards as well. The board's response was thoughtful and engaged, with questions focusing on sustainability and scalability, rather than challenging the fundamental shift in approach. By the meeting's end, Maxwell had secured their continued support for the Foundation's evolving direction, a blend of Eleanor's human-centered vision and his own strategic implementation. Later that evening, as Maxwell stood on his penthouse balcony, watching the city transition from day to night, he reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun as a cynical test, a way to confirm his suspicions about human nature, had instead become a path back to the values his grandmother had tried to instill in him long ago. His phone chimed with an incoming message from Abby. "Grandma says to remind you that Sunday dinner is at 5, not 6 in this week. She's also insisting I tell you that you're welcome to bring Catherine if you'd like. Apparently she thinks everyone needs more home-cooked meals and good company." Maxwell smiled at the invitation, imagining his assistant's surprise at being included in what had become his most valued personal tradition. After a moment's consideration, he replied, "Please thank your grandmother for the invitation. I'll extend it to Catherine, though I suspect she'll be too surprised to accept this time. Perhaps next week. And please tell Maggie I'll bring those old photographs of Eleanor she's been asking about." As he sent the message, Maxwell realized how much had changed in his life beyond the Foundation's programs. The weekly dinners at the Collins apartment had become anchors in his schedule, providing connection and perspective that his previous routines had lacked entirely. The simple pleasure of shared meals and genuine conversation had gradually displaced the isolation he had once mistaken for independence, and while his penthouse remained largely unchanged, still filled with expensive furnishings that held little personal significance, Maxwell had begun creating a small collection of items that mattered. Framed photographs of Eleanor, a hand-knitted scarf Maggie had insisted on making him for the winter months, a ceramic mug from the community center's arts program, emblazoned with their slogan, "Building bridges, not walls." Small changes, perhaps, but representing a fundamental shift in what he valued and how he measured success, both professionally and personally. As the city lights came on across Boston, Maxwell Bennett contemplated the test he had designed a year earlier. He had intended to prove humanity's inherent selfishness, to confirm that gratitude was merely performative rather than genuine. Instead, he had discovered something far more valuable: the possibility of authentic connection, of community that transcended transaction, of giving that enriched both recipient and giver. His grandmother would have called it coming full circle, returning to truths he had known as a child before the world's cynicism had intervened. The journey wasn't complete, the transformation not yet finished, but for the first time in decades, Maxwell found himself looking forward to the path ahead, with genuine curiosity and hope. The test he had designed for others had ultimately tested him instead, and in failing his cynical hypothesis, he had found a far more meaningful success.